If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What is the scariest paranormal, supernatural, or unexplainable thing you've ever seen or heard that you will never forget? I experienced a terrifying event that I still find difficult to comprehend, and it occurred when I was approximately 10 or 11 years old. I still remember the details vividly. When I was younger, I always hung out with two of the same girls every weekend. We went skating, spent the night at each other's houses, etc. We were really close and tight. One day we decided to spend the night after skating with my friend, whom we call Jasmine. She happened to also live near my grandma, so we decided to visit her. On the way to her complex apartment, because there were 6 buildings in a complex with like one section called A building, then B building, etc., we saw a teenager much older than us climbing up the walls of these buildings and just being extremely good at tricks. When talking to my Nana, she declared instantly to stay away from him. I made her promise not to hang with him. Later that evening, around 6:30 to 7:30, when it's still light outside but soon going to be dark, we chose to hang out behind her complex building, where there's a 7-foot-high fence with a small playground. When we arrived, we saw the same teenager from earlier, but facing the woods. Of course I'm like, hey, okay. He turned around once, which was perfectly normal, then turned in his direction again, and then back to me. I saw him have a deformed face or like 2 emerging ones. Then, for the 3rd time, he was normal. My friends and I all saw it, and we ran to her apartment. I know I wasn't seeing things because they saw it too, and I remember confronting him the next day when he said, "Haven't you ever heard of the 7 gates of hell?" After that day, I never saw him again, and our group was never the same, and we grew apart. So in my dream, I was outside my grandma's home. She was dead when this happened. I saw her smiling creepily while standing near the door. Her hair was also strangely arranged, sticking up here and there. I didn't mind it until one day, early in the morning, I was outside my house, and up above the roof, I saw a full black figure sitting, more like in a toddler crawling position, and it was gone the next moment. The weird thing was that they had the same haircut. And another time I was home alone. I came from a shower and was wiping my face when I saw a hand, again full black, on my shoulder, but obviously no one was there. To this day, I don't know what to think of it. I'm not even sure if it's paranormal, or if my brain is playing tricks. I'm a truck driver, and this happened to me back in the 1990s. What I'm going to tell you is from my perspective and my ex-wife's perspective. My ex and I were traveling through Utah. It's in a place called a hole in the wall. At least, that's what it was called. It is literally a hole in the wall that you reach after walking up a hill that is smooth rock with a few knee-high bushes. I was approximately 3/4 of the way up when this happened. First, I must add that it was a beautiful, sunny day with no clouds. I passed a small bush when the day became night. All of a sudden, it was pitch black, and I could see nothing around me. Remember, I was on bare rock? But yet, wherever I happened to be at that moment in time, it had to have been gravel because I heard steps close to me. It was more like someone or something with an injured leg. It was a step drag, step drag, step drag. According to my ex-wife, she said she was watching me walk up the hill when, all of a sudden, I simply vanished from the sight. Remember, it was a rock hillside with only knee-high bushes? According to her, I was gone for 10 or maybe 15 minutes. For me, it felt like only a few seconds. And then I returned, and the sun was up, and it was full daylight again. I continued up the hill to the hole. When I got to the top, I was looking out over an empty field. Coming from the field was the sound of drums. Like you would imagine Native American drums would sound like. But again, remember, there was nothing, just an empty field. I don't know where I disappeared. I've never figured that out. Okay, let me set the scene by saying that I have seen this cloaked figure many times in my life. It's always far between, though. It's like years between sightings. Last night I went out to look for our dogs at midnight, shaking their food bowls and whistling for them. They had gone out and not come back. We live on 4 acres of farmland, so it's not huge but a good size, but we do live in the Appalachian Mountains, and we are right at the base of the woods. We also have that huge cemetery, 500 plots with a lot of unmarked graves or just marked with a rock, behind our house. I got all the way to the other edge of our property from our house. On the other side of the property, I turned around, and the black cloaked figure was standing on the cemetery. It looked 6 feet, sort of levitated, so it's not a person, and entirely black. I stayed with other things, but this was new for him. My dogs showed up on our porch 30 minutes later with their tails between their legs. They both looked terrified. I think the presence was holding my dogs to lure me. When I was a kid, I was in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I had the door cracked because I was scared of being anywhere at night alone that wasn't my bedroom. The door started to open really slowly, and I saw this weird bluish-green glow coming from one side of the hallway. I heard the sound of feet rhythmically shuffling on the floor and watched this glowing man sidestep down the hallway past me. He moved super weirdly, like he glided across the floor, and his movement was really smooth. He was wearing blue jeans and a turquoise long-sleeve button-up shirt, and he had brown hair that looked almost like molded plastic. He was glowing super brightly, and the glow was the same color as his shirt. When I saw him, I felt super scared, like a sense of dread came over me. I closed my eyes and only opened them when I knew he had passed by from the sound of his feet. I sat there for a while, then ran back to bed. Like 9 years later, in high school, me and my mom were talking about weird shit that happened in our old house, and my mom said she used to have really weird dreams in that house. She said one time she dreamed of a man walking down the hall exactly as I had seen. She even acted out how he moved, and she said she never told me because she didn't want to scare me and never thought to mention it to my dad. She described him exactly as I remembered him, and where her bed is positioned. If she were to look into the hallway from her bed, she would have been looking right at the hall I saw him in. I don't know if we somehow had the same dream and it seemed more real to me, if we both saw him on the same night, or if we both saw him on different nights and he was just always in the house, but it scared us both pretty bad. A few years ago, I was visiting a few friends at the UA campus in Tucson. We had a long visit, and the night approached midnight. I decided to part ways with my friends and walk back to my hotel room. As I was making my way back, this black cat ran in front of my path, making me jump back a bit. I laughed it off and turned my gaze back to the path. That is when I noticed this silhouette of a naked woman looking at me several yards away. When I tried to refocus on what I was looking at, it was a tree facing toward me, and it turned back to its original position. This freaked me out of what I just saw. Was that tree really facing me? I thought of turning back around, but I had to tell myself I was just seeing things. I made the choice just to keep walking. As I made my way through the street, it felt like things around me were watching me and curious about me. Like shadows watching me from houses or from across the street hiding. I would sometimes hear a whisper, which would send chills down my spine. I tried not to panic as I made my way back to my room. The atmosphere around me felt like I was in Halloween Town from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Once I reached the hotel, the air shifted back to normal. It was spooky and creepy, but it wasn't as scary as one would think. When I got back to my hotel room, I went to bed, still in awe of what I had just witnessed. Did I really just see what I saw? Was that real? Once morning came, I met up with my friends for breakfast and told them what I had experienced. They poked fun at me, saying I was probably smoking weed or drunk. After the teasing and giggling stopped, one of my friends told me that Tucson was known to be an outlaw town. Meaning a lot of people were killed due to no laws during the early days. He said most likely I saw those spirits still wandering around the city. My other friend poked at the idea that my third eye opened, so that's why I was able to see them. I don't know, but all I know is that what I saw and experienced was very real. I now believe Tucson is a real-life Halloween town. I've been holding on to this since Memorial Day, 2023. This was the first ever party I went to with my boyfriend, and it just so happened to be at a lake his friend owned. There had to have been 20 people there at some point, and at the end of the night, some of us camped out around said lake. For some context, this lake is out in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Everyone had either a camper or slept in their cars, but me and my boyfriend had an actual tent, and obviously there weren't any bathrooms, so we just had to go find a place hidden from the eyes to go. Remember this because it's important later. After the party winded down, everyone either left or returned to their campers and such, and me and my boyfriend went to our tent. I fell asleep rather quickly, but woke up hours later to rain and wind so strong that our tent was practically sideways. It was storming so hard that we almost made a run for it to get some actual shelter, but the rain had calmed down a bit by then. This is where the real freaky SHT happens. I had to go to the bathroom so badly but had been holding it because of the rain, but I couldn't hold it anymore. I opened the tent to find a place, and, I kid you not, there was some dark brown coyote-looking thing crouched behind the tent. I remember staring at it, trying to figure out what it is. I can't see well, and honestly, I was so scared that I just ignored it, finished my business, and went back into the tent. It's all I could think of the entire night, and the next morning I checked, and there wasn't any TBH behind the tent I could have mistaken this thing for. My friends say I might have been visited by a skinwalker. Does anyone know what this means? We drove through a time slip. I believe it was winter 2007. We lived briefly in Fort Hood, Texas, and were delivering my son to his father for Christmas break. We met him and his wife somewhere in Missouri, at Amictix, halfway between home and TX. I believe it was near or in Springfield, Missouri. Exchange goes well, and we hit the road back to TX, hoping to make it before nightfall. We're heading west towards Joplin, and because we figured it would be simple to get back, we take an off-ramp to hit a gas station and let the dogs pee and stretch our legs. We verified with the clerk where we get back on the freeway to resume going towards Joplin, and he said, "Nah. Keep going down this road, and it'll hook around and get you near Joplin faster than going backwards." So we say thank you and get back on the road. We then drove. And drove. And it got darker and darker, and we were lost in the middle, if bum duck nowhere, Oklahoma. Finally, lights are ahead. Thank goodness. Find a gas station and consult a damn map. It was already around 8 or 8:30 p.m. and it's far away from civilization. Only, there wasn't a gas station. Just one dusty road down the middle of a dead ghost town. Swinging lights. Faded signs. Cornfields last for days. And suddenly every nerve ending in my body stood up, and I looked up like, the fuck? And my husband said, "You feel that too?" I stared out the window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing and feeling. And all I could manage was, "Get us the duck out of here," and he floored it. Thankfully, the town was only about a mile long, and we could see the end from where we were, so we just booked it towards the only set of lights in the place. Then we turned a bend, and for miles and miles, all we saw were cornfields. I said, "Don't stop. Whatever is up here will get us, and I don't want to watch while they kill the dogs first and then us." Hubby agreed, and we drove steadily in silence. The whole thing between the gas station and finally finding the signs for Joplin took maybe an hour. We were so thankful to be back on a freeway and heading towards civilization. So why do I think we drove through a time slip? Well, for one, an old ghost town with working traffic lights. Second, when we got on the ramp for Joplin, the car clock read 11:48-ish p.m. What took an hour in our heads was almost 3 in real time. And thirdly, what were the cornfields doing, full and green? It was the middle of December. Time slip. I have multiple stories about the house I grew up in. These are the most memorable. One house I lived in when I was a teenager. I had stuff go flying off a wall shelf unit. Helium balloons we had left over from a party would somehow teleport around the house despite having no path of getting ahead of you. It would be in one room on the second floor, and then all of a sudden, in the laundry room, the basement was bobbing up and down like it was being tugged on. I was alone there one night and decided to go out. I locked the house up, and my parents were on our boat over an hour's drive away. I came home to the dining room with chairs stacked up along with other kitchen items in a magnificent way, leaning against a ceiling fan. I would routinely see the light in the hall turn on and foot shadows under my closed door walking back and forth at night, despite hearing both my parents snoring in their room. The worst was one night I had a couple friends over, and I lived in the basement apartment of this house at this time. We heard the doorknob outside start jiggling. Not expecting anyone, I went over and flung the door open to find no one there. This doorknob giggling kept happening, and we all, being freaked out, just ignored it. After a while, there was pounding on all the walls around us. Just going in a circle around us. My friends decided to leave. I was left alone for the rest of the night, hearing footsteps walking up and down the stairs to my basement apartment. Later on, we had a tenant take up that basement apartment. He would say he would routinely see an old lady just standing and staring at him down there. Years ago, we were at a gathering at a friend's house. It was evening, and it was starting to get dark. As the kids started heading inside the house, my niece, about 3 to 4 at the time, mentioned she saw some soldiers outside. Mind you, this was way out in the sticks in the upstate of South Carolina, and there was not much development of any kind around besides peach fields and cow pastures. The creepy thing is that Cowpens National Battlefield, the site of a 1791 American Revolution battle, was only a few miles down the road. Same house, but maybe some months later. It was around 10 p.m., and I was alone and walking up the driveway to my friend's house when I heard my name called from the darkness. It sounded similar to my friend's voice, and so I answered and took a few steps towards it, thinking it was my friend, but stopped because something just felt off. I felt super creeped out. I went inside, and my friend was in his room. No one had been outside at all. Okay, so I have never spoken to anyone about this, but recently I started thinking about it again, and I can't seem to get it off my mind, so here we go. I remember one night when I was like 12 or 13. I had always wanted to see something supernatural, to the point where I used to stare out my bedroom window at night in hopes of seeing something, but of course nothing ever showed up. That was until one night, I was laying in bed playing on my Nintendo I believe, and I heard this commotion going on outside across the road, almost as if someone was arguing. I quickly got out of bed and pulled the curtains aside carefully. In a tall tree across the road, a human figure was sitting. It looked catastrophic yet poised. It looked as if it were looking down at someone behind a tall bush. I could not tell if it was a male or a female, but it looked more like a male. The figure was wearing a black hoodie that covered his slasher head and gave off this otherworldly aura. I could not stop staring at them. It was almost as if I was being put under a spell. I observed him slash her as they sat there, and I thought that they couldn't see me, because I was looking through such a small crack in the curtains. My room was entirely dark and I was not making a sound, but then suddenly the figure turned its head, and I could feel their gaze on me. My body froze, and I felt like a deer in the middle of the road. How could they know I was watching? No normal human could. I watched, frozen in fear, scared of what might happen next, but suddenly my fear vanished, and I heard a faint voice in my head, that was not my own, going, "Don't be scared, little girl, you shouldn't be up this late. Get to sleep and forget this." I listened in shock until suddenly, at an inhuman speed, the figure leapt from the tree and ran away, almost in the blink of an eye. I never saw the figure again or experienced anything like that night again, but I will never forget it. Even as I grow older, I'm 20 now, people might not believe me, and that's alright, but I know what I saw. I was 9 years old, putting up signs near my tree house. It was on higher ground, with a 20-foot long hill leading down to a tractor lane, followed by a tree line and swampy woods. As I was nailing a sign up, I heard a stick snap in the woods down the hill. I look up and see a creature staring at me, standing on the wood line. I don't know exactly how big it was, but I would guess at least 7 tall, based on me being 6'5" now and how tall I am next to trees. I remember it being covered in hair, but the weird part is that it was pink. After what seemed like an eternity of being frozen in fear of this thing but unable to run, it turned to the right and ran off upright, snapping in half a freshly fallen tree that was resting on a live tree. That sound made me run faster than I ever have to the house. I locked the doors and windows and told my mom what I saw. She laughed and said, "It's the Pink Panther." As did my dad when he got home, although I can tell you saw something, he pondered. I went back to the spot with my best friend about a month or so after the incident. We found the snapped tree. We didn't see footprints. I also can't picture the creature in my head when I think back. I can remember every other detail, other than the clothes I was wearing. The only thing I can think of that is logical would be a black bear with mange. Black bears with mange look freaky as hell, if you Google them. We also have lots of black bears in the area. But how do they manage to remain upright for such a long time? And to run and snap a tree? Anyone have any ideas? This happened a year and a half ago, and I am still constantly thinking about it. I was driving to the woods with 2 friends. It wasn't a remote area, it was right off the side of the road next to a one-way tunnel. A train drove above the tunnel, and it was one of the small ones that you needed to honk before you drove through. It was a wooded area with farmland around it. We were chatting, and my friend, I'll call her S, said, "There's something moving over there," and she pointed to the trees. I heard movement as well, and when I glanced over, I expected to see a squirrel or something like that. Instead, all 3 of us saw a human-like figure heading towards us, but he was still in the trees. Our windows were rolled down, and as soon as we acknowledged it, "What the duck is that?" It stopped. I would have assumed it may have been someone walking around, maybe someone homeless, but this wasn't an area where people just walked around, and this is near a fairly small town with a total of 2 homeless people that everyone knew. It definitely was not that. I still would have assumed it was a person, except for the fact that there was no mouth. All 3 of us saw this, and we still talk about it, and we are not paranormal people. It was human-shaped, but it was quite literally shrouded in darkness, which sounds so stupid when I type it, but it was. It didn't have a clear area from where it started and began, but it was human-shaped. I don't want to say transparent or translucent, because that sounds crazy. It had no mouth, but we all saw its eyes. As soon as it stopped and stood there, it literally turned around, walked into the woods, and disappeared. It vanished, and I know that sounds ridiculous, and I'm personally very skeptical, but we all saw it just fade away. We got the hell out of there, and we all talk about it to this day. So this isn't my story, but my father's, which makes me believe this story all the more because my father was not the type of person who believes in the supernatural. I'll tell the story from his point of view. I had been driving all day. It was around 11 p.m., maybe. I can't really remember. By this point, I was extremely tired and just wanted to get my load delivered so I could rest up. There was maybe another hour and a half left to drive, so I just decided to push through. I forget the exact road, my father has passed now, so I can't ask, I was driving through the mountains, and it was pitch black. I could barely see in front of me. This road was notorious for being difficult as it was windy and had somewhat sharp turns. I could feel myself drifting off. Eventually, in the middle of the road, I saw a woman. She was wearing a dirty white dress, had long black hair, and had what looked to be a crown made of leaves and roots wrapped around her head. I couldn't see any features because her back was facing me. I was about to slam the brakes when I noticed she was staying the same distance away from me. She appeared to be gliding across the road. I felt entranced by her. I couldn't help but follow her movements. When she slid to the right, I followed suit. I couldn't look away, nor could I free myself from her trance. This goes on for what felt like about 10 minutes. Eventually, she just disappears into the light. I blink my eyes, and suddenly it's daytime, and I'm exiting the mountains onto a long, straight highway. I'm wide awake now, and the truck is still going, meaning I did not fall asleep. I pulled over and tried to figure out what had happened. I have no answer. I delivered my load, but I took a different way back, making sure to sleep whenever I felt even a little drowsy. If anyone has any information they can share, a similar story or possible explanation for the missing time and hallucinations, please let me know in the comments. I would love to finally solve this mystery that plagued my father. Me and 3 buddies were hanging out late one night in a car on a dark street. You fill in the blank. I picked this particular street because my grandma lived on it and I was very familiar with the neighborhood. I knew the families that lived in most of the houses on that block, elderly people. When we pulled up, I surveyed the houses. Everyone's lights were off. We should have no trouble parking here for as long as we want. I had the driver park in front of my grandma's friend's house on the corner. My grandma's friend, much like my grandma, was an old woman who went to bed early. No family lived with her, there was no husband. I knew her for most of my life. Anyway, my grandma's friend lived on a medium-sized lot, and her house was up on a small hill. The hill was small, but it was pretty steep. It was a nightmare to mow. I'm sitting in the back, behind the passenger seat. The car is still running at this point. We hadn't been there for more than 2 or 3 minutes. We had just begun our activities when I caught a glimpse of something moving in the passenger side mirror. I looked out the window, and what I saw scared the ducking shit out of me at the time, and it still scares me to this day, over 10 years later. I saw the silhouette of a person. Laying on their stomach. Doing an army crawl, really ducking fast on the side of the hill, and it was headed right for us. This thing was moving fast. I'm telling you, I don't know how it's even possible on flat ground to crawl that fast. Let alone be on the side of a hill. It wasn't going down the hill, it was moving parallel along the side of it. Anyway, I screamed for the driver to go. 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 Now. Go. This thing had covered some serious ducking ground in a matter of seconds. It was within 5 or 6 feet of my door when we squeal-tired the duck out of there. As we got to the end of the street and turned onto a main road, the driver and my buddy next to me in the back were yelling. What the duck, man? Was it the cops? I couldn't speak. I was so badly shaken up. It had only been 10 or 15 seconds since we bolted down the street. I just wanted to get as far away from that road as possible. I couldn't process what I had seen. I didn't really want to, and that's when it happened. I looked to my good friend, P, in the passenger seat up front, and he had an absolutely terrified look on his face. I blurted out, "You saw it, too. Didn't you?" He didn't say anything. He just kept looking in the side mirror, then back to the dashboard. By this time, my other 2 friends were pretty mad, and emotions were starting to escalate. I told them I saw somebody or something crawling toward the car really fast. I asked P to back me up, all he did was nod, and then he asked us to drop him off at home. I wanted him to tell us what he saw, but he refused. All he would say is that he saw something. At the time, that was good enough for me. I was just relieved that I wasn't the only one who saw it and was freaked out by it. To this day, I don't know who or what it was. I hated going to my grandma's house at night after that. And I never really wanted to be around her friend after that, either. The thought of a 60-something-year-old woman army crawling that fast at 1 a.m. scares me even more. When I was around 7 to 8 years old, my cousin was staying the night, and we slept in my bunk bed. He is at the bottom, and I am at the top. It was just peeking into 3 a.m., and we were having a conversation because we liked to stay up as long as we could and just talk. At one point, I decided to go down and lay in his bed with him so we could talk easier. After talking for a few minutes, I decided to joke around and say, "Shh, someone is approaching, I can hear them. Let's hide under the covers." So we both get under laughing, and then all of a sudden, from the middle of my bedroom, granted, it's a small room, It sounded like someone slamming onto my floor with a sledgehammer over and over again, loud pounding, then loud knocking on the wall behind us. The deck was directly outside my window, and loud knocking on the left wall which the bed was against. On the other side of the wall was the garage. This went on for like 5 minutes or so, maybe less. It felt like ages. I remember mustering up the courage to look, but I saw nothing. Right after it stopped, I went to my mom, whose room was right next to mine on the other side, freaking out and telling her what happened. She and my dad heard absolutely none of it. My mom checked outside and saw nothing. She went into the basement, which was my older brother's room, and he was asleep, and let's say, it was my brother. It was so loud, there's no way my parents wouldn't have woken up. Unexplained to this day. I was laying in bed sometime during my middle school years, trying to get to sleep. My room was right next to the stairs, and I looked directly into the bathroom across the hall. Both the door to the bathroom and my room were open. My room and my parents' room were to the right as you came up the stairs. My sister's and the guest bedroom were to the left. My folks were downstairs on the desktop finishing up some bills or something, and my younger sister, who was about 2 years old, was in bed. Light was bleeding up the stairs faintly from the computer room so that the shadows in the bathroom were pitch black, but the hallway was very dimly illuminated. Suddenly, I have this feeling of unease. I hadn't been able to sleep, so I was tossing and turning, but this feeling of unease made me look out my door, which had a decent view of the dimly illuminated hallway and the black shadows of the bathroom. On the right side of the hallway, my parents' room, a dark, man-sized, and shaped figure glided across the floor and stopped in front of the bathroom. The shadows, or robe, or whatever it was cloaked in, were darker than the pitch black of the bathroom, yet somehow defined enough to tell it was standing facing to the left, towards the other end of the hallway. Then its head turned to me, and it just looked at me for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't bring myself to move, I was so surprised and scared. The thing just stood there for a few seconds before turning its head back forward, to the left of where I was facing, and gliding down the hallway out of sight. After a few seconds of nothing happening, I got up and crept to the hallway. Nothing was out there, the door to my sister's room was closed and hadn't moved, the guest bedroom was completely empty, and my folks were downstairs as if nothing ever happened. The hallway floor usually creaked, but it made no sound. The stairs creaked in certain areas, but they also made no sound. There had been no sound of walking, no sound of doors or windows opening or shutting, nothing. I still think about that creepy-ass shadow today, at least a decade later. I have no good explanation for it. We lived in an area where several bloody battles were fought, and there's always stories of soldiers' ghosts or apparitions, and I even had another creepy incident where I was chased by something I couldn't see in the woods near one of the battlefields once. But this was something else entirely. Thankfully, I never saw it again. So one night, I'm carpooling with my friend to work. Just her and I were driving down this rarely used back road that just so happened to be a shortcut to work. I'd have to say it was about 10 in the evening, and there weren't any other cars in front of us or behind us. The road we were on was a very old one and hadn't been renovated in years. There were no lights on this road whatsoever. Just the ones coming from the car's headlights. So we're driving along for a good 15 minutes, and then we suddenly come to a stop sign that's literally in the middle of nowhere. My friend, who happens to be a very careful driver, slowly pulls up to this stop sign for fear of possibly running past it. Heaven forbid we make a rolling stop in all this traffic, right? So the car is fully stopped, and I'm looking out the window. It's about this time that I see this lady standing there on the corner. She looked to be in her mid-40s and was in something that resembled a white coat and pants. Because there wasn't much lighting, I really couldn't make out much of her face or anything of that nature. But seeing someone standing there struck me as extremely odd. I'm thinking to myself, who in their right mind would be out here in the middle of the night? So I turn to my friend and ask her if we should maybe see if she needs a ride or something, to which my friend replies, "She?" And I say, "Come on, you can't tell me that's a man now." Then silence. Suddenly, my friend looks me dead in the eye and proceeds to tell me that she has absolutely no clue as to what I'm talking about. I think she's joking around, and I say, "You can't be serious. I'm talking about that woman over there." As I'm saying this, my eyes pan over to where the lady was standing, and no one is there. No lady. No nothing. So there we were, idling at a stop sign in the middle of nowhere, with absolutely nobody else around. I suddenly get this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I start to freak out a bit. I'm not crazy. I know exactly what I saw. I then muster up enough energy and yell, "Go! Let's get the heck out of here." And we take off like a bat out of hell. From that point on, I refused to look in the rearview mirror and pretty much kept my eyes closed for the duration of that ride. Not much was said after that. Nothing at all. The following week, I tell this story to one of our co-workers, and he proceeds to tell me about how several years ago this lady had been brutally murdered around that area. Apparently this person was a nurse and was either on her way to or coming back from work when she was attacked and subsequently killed in the middle of the night. The more he continued with this story, the more freaked out I got. I just kept remembering the white outfit that I saw this lady in. It was very similar to that of someone who was either a nurse or someone who worked in the medical field. Seriously, I'm getting chills thinking about it now. Up until this day, I refuse to drive down that back road. Day or night, I'm not doing it. Nope. And if I absolutely had to, I'd be running that stop sign like you wouldn't believe. I went fishing one night, and on my way back to the vehicle at about 1 a.m., I had my headlamp on. I was walking on the trail when something caught my eye in front of me, and as I looked up, there was a man walking towards me with jeans, a white vest, a blue shirt unbuttoned, and his fishing bag and rod slung over his shoulder. I stopped dead, and he carried on walking and went straight through me. I lived in a house with a few ghosts, a little girl, a dog, and an old man. Some days I would walk into my room, and all my cupboards and drawers would be wide open. I saw the old man sitting at the base of my bed one night, and the little girl was from the swimming pool. She drowned there and didn't like people being in the pool after sunset. The dog would bark when someone rang the doorbell, and it would urinate on my dad's bedroom carpet. You could stand there and watch the puddle form. The trash bin would open and close all night, rather loudly. My brother also used to be attacked and used to have scratches all over his body. He would stand in front of the mirror to see and feel the scratches forming. He used to feel the spirits climbing on and off my bed some nights. My brother and I have always seen and felt supernatural spirits. We can even drive past a house and tell you if it has something inside it. I wish I could communicate with the dead, though, one day. I live in a small town in Montana, nestled in the Rockies. My house is just a few miles from a vast expanse of national forest land. It's beautiful, sure, but it can be incredibly isolating. That isolation is part of why I love it, but after what happened, it's also why I'm terrified. Last Saturday, I decided to take a late afternoon hike. There's a trail I frequent, one that winds up to a small clearing overlooking the valley. I brought my dog, Max, a German Shepherd who's never been spooked by anything in his life. We set off around 3 p.m., figuring we'd be back before sunset. The hike up was uneventful. The forest was serene, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. Max was his usual self, darting ahead and then circling back to me. It was perfect, which is exactly why I moved out here. When we reached the clearing, I sat down on a fallen log to catch my breath and enjoy the view. Max was sniffing around, but after a few minutes, he froze. He was staring at the tree line on the opposite side of the clearing, his ears perked up and his body tense. "What's up, boy?" I asked, trying to see what he was looking at. That's when I noticed it. At first, it was just a shadow moving between the trees. I squinted, thinking maybe it was a deer or something. But then it stepped out into the clearing. It looked like a human, but not quite. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale, almost grayish, and its eyes were completely black. Max started growling, a low, menacing sound that I'd never heard from him before. The figure stepped forward, and that's when I noticed it was mimicking my movements from earlier, almost like it was replaying a tape of me walking. Then it spoke. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, and Max was restless, pacing around the living room. Around 2 a.m., just as I was starting to doze off, I heard it. "Max, what's up, boy?" It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was definitely my voice. It came from outside, near the tree line. I didn't sleep at all after that. When the sun finally came up, I took Max and drove into town. I needed to be around people, somewhere that didn't feel so exposed. I told my friend Jake about it, and he just laughed, saying I'd been out in the woods too long. Maybe he's right. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I can't shake the feeling that something out there saw me, remembered me, and called back in my own voice. I haven't been back to that trail since. Every time I think about going for a hike, I hear that voice again, and I can't bring myself to leave the house. I don't know what I saw, but I'm sure of one thing, it saw me too. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I need to know I'm not losing my mind. I had lived in an old brick 2-family townhouse in Forest Hills, New York, for several years as a child. I loved that house, save for the nightmares I had on a near nightly basis, which varied between the bizarre and the horrific, at least for me at the time. I think my experiences began around 4 or 5 years old, when I remember messing around with an Ouija board when no one was around. Looking back, knowing what I know now, it may have been my fault for the experiences that befell me later. The downstairs section of the house had one bedroom, which I slept in. My mother slept on the couch in the living room. Whenever I had a nightmare, I'd take my pillows and blanket to the living room and sleep on the floor next to my mother. One night, however, would forever make me believe that there was more to this world than what we could see in front of us. I had woken up in the middle of the night from another one of my night terrors and did what I usually did. However, this time I woke up again some time later but felt compelled to look into the dining room. The dining room had a large table centered in the room with a hanging lamp suspended above. It was the lamp that drew my attention. The lamp didn't look like it normally did in the dark. There was something either floating by it or hanging on it. It was a dark mass that had the appearance of a face for a while. The mouth was moving as if to say something, but I heard nothing. After hanging in the air for what seemed like an eternity, it congealed into an orb-like shape and fell to the ground. I immediately grabbed my pillow, jumped onto the couch on the opposite side of my mother, and hid under the covers for the rest of the night. I never told anyone about the incident until years later, when I watched an episode of Ghost Hunters. They were investigating Penn State Penitentiary and caught what looked like a shadow figure appearing and running from the camera. I came to find out years later that the house indeed had some haunted history to it, but that was long after we moved out of the house. So our boys' ages are 3 and 2. A few days ago, about 30 minutes after we had put the boys to bed, I was in our front living room when all of a sudden I heard our oldest son crying out for me. I peeked my head out into the hallway and looked in our other living room real quick to see if my husband was already in it. He wasn't, so I walked down the hallway and went into the boys' bedroom, and both of the boys were sound asleep. Weird. I shut the door and walked into the main living room, where my husband was, and told him what just happened. He just shrugged his shoulders and said he didn't hear anything. The room I was in was closer to their bedroom, so I could see how he didn't hear him. Then last night, just after midnight, I laid down to go to sleep. I was almost asleep until I heard my youngest son start to cry over the monitor. I waited a few seconds to see if he was just moving around and would fall back asleep or if it was the real deal. He starts hysterically crying, so I jump up and run down the hallway to their bedroom. The boys are sound asleep. I'm very confused. I go back to bed and fall asleep. Now, a little backstory, I am a very heavy sleeper. My husband always had to wake me up when the boys were babies. They would wake up in the middle of the night because I didn't hear them. He always says I could sleep through the world ending and I would never know. So after I fell back asleep, I woke up at 5 a.m. to my youngest son hysterically crying again over the monitor. A little side note, both times I look at the monitor, I don't see either of the boys' movements. I see them peacefully sleeping, but I hear the crying. I get my sleepy self up, look over at my sleeping husband, think it's strange that he was asleep but didn't wake me up, and sleeplessly walk down to the boys' bedroom. They are both sound asleep. Now I feel like I'm losing it. I know what I heard. No TVs were on when any of these events happened. We don't own a radio. And our monitor is one of those dinosaur ones, so it doesn't hook up to Wi-Fi or anything. And the first occurrence with my oldest son I heard with my own ears when my son was crying, "Mommy." I didn't even have the monitor on. I feel like I'm going crazy. Nothing like this has ever happened before. One time I got woken up to something whistling outside our bedroom windows at 3 a.m. a few months ago. It kept moving from one window to the other in a matter of seconds. Very eerie whistling. We have a fenced-in backyard, and the one window is in the fenced-in area. Our fence is 6 feet high, so that scared me even more, thinking something was on our roof. I was absolutely terrified and frozen in bed. It finally stopped, and I went back to bed. I talked to our next-door neighbor about it. He lived here his whole life, and he said he had seen and heard things out here that people would think he was insane. We live on a quiet, dead-end road with a swamp or heavy woods in our backyard. Some basic information first. I'm an atheist, as is my dad. On the other hand, my mother is a very devout Catholic believer. The only reason I'm writing about this second-hand experience is because of my dad. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, and he isn't easily scared. He is 1.9 meters tall, a heavy-built man who has been in war and saw a lot of nasty stuff, and usually he makes fun of my mom when she speaks of some other strange occurrences that happened to her. This happened on the Day of All Saints, a very big Catholic holiday, when families go to the graves of their loved ones and light candles and bring flowers, so at night the whole cemetery is illuminated by candlelight. On this day, the first day in November, my dad and mom were wrapping up their tour of the graveyard, as darkness was beginning to fall on the cemetery and most, if not all, of the people were gone home. I'll describe it in my father's words. First, we heard the sound of something dragging along the concrete path between rows of graves. Suddenly, a small girl dragging a four-wheel cart begins to appear, and she is humming some indistinguishable melody. The full figure of this small child, approximately 7 years old, was visible, with the exception of her feet. I begin to walk behind her at an approximate 50-meter distance, while my wife freezes in place, and all she says is, "Don't leave me alone." Soon I was on the same pathway as the little girl. I was making quite large steps, but the distance between us kept getting greater, which was very odd. She appeared to hover about 20 centimeters above the ground and was rapidly accelerating. I begin to run behind her, like in some sort of trance, but the girl inexplicably goes further and further until she disappears behind a distant slope that ends at the cemetery fence. I looked around, but the girl was nowhere to be found. That evening, when they came back from the graveyard and my dad told me what happened, I saw for the first time in my life fear in my dad's eyes, and I believe every word he said. Since then, I've often thought about it and tried all kinds of rational explanations, but I've come out empty-handed. I, a 25-year-old female, and 3 friends, a 42-year-old female, a 42-year-old male, and a 24-year-old male, have been in Death Valley for the past couple days. It's our first time exploring the park. Everything was going well. We've been to Ubahibi Crater, the Natural Bridge, Badwater Basin, Lake Manly, Artist Palette, and Golden Loop. All lovely, peaceful energy. Tonight, we decided to stargaze closer to our Airbnb, outside of DV, in Beatty, Nevada. We left around 10:30 p.m. and planned to drive 5 minutes closer to Death Valley, but there wasn't a suitable place to park along the road. So we decided to drive to Hell's Gate, one of the entrances to DV. We had been driving for about 10 minutes and were all like, "How far is this?" I pulled out my phone and found the address. It was 15 minutes out. The entire car agreed, "What's 15 more minutes?" We discussed this later on and how it was all very strange. We agreed to drive the entire distance, but the entire car was starting to feel a bit uneasy the further we drove in. We saw some headlights that weren't moving, and 42M and 25M made jokes about aliens. We approached the gate and pulled off, got out of the car, grabbed the telescope, and set up. 42M and I saw a shooting star, and we were super excited and gushed about it. 42M started pointing out all the different stars, talking about Mars and Jupiter, etc. Me and 42F were adjusting the telescope, but it was very difficult to see. Then we called 42M over to adjust it. It was around 11 p.m. We were there for maybe 3 minutes. And then we saw a flash of light that caught all of our attention. We looked over and saw a very clearly defined light that held for a second before shutting off completely. There is a bathroom there, but there is no electricity in the bathroom. One of my friends saw someone glide off the table and disappear. They called out to them, saying, "Who is there?" and "Hello." We were all frozen, waiting for a few seconds before I said, "We need to go." The entire group moved swiftly back into the car, and we drove away. We immediately started talking about what we saw, and it took us getting back to our apartment 30 minutes away to feel normal. But even then, things feel off. Any explanations? Thoughts? Ideas? We are all very spooked. I think my nephew and son saw ghosts in my sister's old apartment. I had fallen on some hard times and been staying with my sister for 2 months or so. It started innocently enough. My 4-year-old nephew told me there were ghosts in the house. He said they were kids, and that they're mean because they pick on him. I didn't think too much of it at first. Kids his age imagine things, but then something weird happened to my husband. One night, while I was sleeping, my husband woke up to the sound of children laughing in the hallway. My sister and her family were out of town, so it couldn't be my nephew, and our son was sleeping in bed with us. He got up to check it out, and the sound stopped as he neared the hallway, but the door to my sister's room was open, and there was a bowling video playing on her computer, one she'd taken recently at her son's birthday party. She had closed the door and turned her computer off before she left, though. The next weird thing that happened was when my 2-year-old son became afraid of the hallway. He became visibly frightened when he'd go near it and literally say "ghosts," pointing and shaking. Things seemed to chill out for a while, until one day I heard my son making some weird noises, so I went to check it out. I found him in the hallway, looking as if he were facing someone right in front of him, maybe just a little taller than he was, swinging punches. I was a little creeped out by it, so I led him away and distracted him with something else. It happened again a few nights later, though. My husband took my son to the potty. My son came back to our bedroom before my husband did. When my husband got back in the room, our son was standing there looking at a fixed spot with his mean face on, swinging as if he were trying to fight someone, saying no and go away. My husband asked him what he was doing, and he said, fighting the bad guy. Our son then proceeded to walk away. He took a few steps, then turned around and said, "No, you don't follow me," and acted as if he were pushing someone. Again, a little time passes. One night, my family and I were laying in bed, trying to go to sleep. It's dark in our room, but I look at the doorway and see the silhouette of a child. I think it's my nephew, so I tell him to go to bed as I lay my head back down. Now, my nephew is a spaz, so he usually runs off, stomping his feet and making a bunch of noise. I didn't hear anything, so I look up again, and he's gone. Alright, whatever, I get up to go pee. As I'm walking to the bathroom, I peek into my nephew's room, and he's sleeping, out cold. It's possible that he just fell asleep quickly, but he never does that. He always lays awake and watches cartoons for a while before he falls asleep. That's all that's happened. We moved out not long after that, but we were still sufficiently creeped out. The place just had a weird vibe to it. Even the adults found our moods affected, like we would suddenly get grumpy for no reason, and one night I swear I heard somebody yell "hey" right into my ear. I felt their breath in my ear. I was so happy to get back on my feet and move out of there. I went to a summer camp in Indiana. I was a first-year scout with major homesickness and arachnophobia, so I didn't sleep much. One night, I was sitting by the cooling embers of the fire while the rest of my troop was asleep. It was perfectly silent, aside from the breeze in the bushes and the crickets. It had to be about 3 in the morning, based on the state of the cooling embers. About 30 yards away from me was a cluster of tall pine trees. At the very top of the trees, I saw what appeared to be lightning bugs fluttering around. But they weren't blinking, they were much brighter. After staring at these lights for a short while, I noticed they looked more like rings, sort of like those glow sticks you can put on your head. The lights slowly and silently descended down the tree as if they were floating, one by one, in a single file line. As they approached the ground, they turned toward the tents and began to fan out as they hovered about 10 feet off the ground. At this point, I'm frozen in my chair. I'm too freaked out to move or speak, hoping they won't notice me. Each tent in the camp had one light ring hovering above it for about 30 seconds. Then the rings decided to hover down into the surrounding forest. I have chills writing about it. The next day, nobody in my troop believed me, thinking I only saw fireflies. I have no idea what these things were, but I know what I saw. I'm just glad they seemed peaceful and harmless. I went out at 3:30 a.m. that night to give my dog some water when he escaped from his cage and jumped over the fence. I went outside my house to wait for him to come home. I saw my dog walk towards another street, so I followed him just to make sure he wouldn't get lost. The weird thing was that after I reached the corner where he should be, he was gone. I know my dog. He doesn't walk without stopping every time to sniff or pee, so I was surprised to see half of his body already turning to another corner of the street. I followed him, and when I got there, he was gone again. Then I saw him in another corner, so I decided to follow him there again. Now this is the part where I'm weirded out because how can he be on the other end of the street already? I followed him to that street, and of course he's not there again, but I saw half of his body turn to a narrower street, between houses. I'm now thinking this is strange because the neighbor's dog should be barking right now, and I'm sure this thing I'm following isn't my dog. But, of course, I still followed it. Now, when I saw that the narrow street was so dark, I stopped. As soon as I got there, the dogs started barking, which was odd because why didn't they bark at my dog? I'm now thinking it would be a bad idea to go follow him since I've seen this horror movie scenario already where you follow a ghost. I didn't panic or anything, but as I was walking back home, I was certain I would see my dog waiting on the porch. Of course, he was there, just waiting for me. I'm sure it couldn't be him I was following, because if he did decide to go home, he would have to pass through the same street. Also, he sniffs and pees almost every 10 seconds while walking, so I know it couldn't be him. I'm proud of myself for not following it up to that dark, narrow street. I am an 18-year-old female who just graduated high school. My mom and my 14-year-old sister moved in with my grandma a week after my dad and grandfather died. Anyway, we moved in about a month ago. My grandma lives on a very rural dirt road that's simple to miss and goes for miles. The closet neighbors live about 5 miles away. Anyway, recently I've started to notice something standing at the edge of the woods. I got the room that faces the woods, and there's a window right above my bed. The thing is difficult to see, and it only shows up at night. It will faintly scream at random hours of the night. It's like being unnaturally pale. It looks almost human, but it's so unnatural looking that I don't know how to explain it. I brought it up with my mom and grandma, but they brushed it off as my mind was playing tricks on me. I would have agreed if my sister hadn't come into my room that night complaining about a faint, screaming noise. I went outside to check what it was after trying to brush it off for 2 weeks. As I got closer to the screaming, it became weaker. I know this part is going to sound fake, but I swear I could have seen a humanoid tall figure staring at me from a distance. My only protection was my 3-year-old Italian Mastiff and my iron bat. I ran back as fast as I could. I could hear it chasing after me, or so I thought. When I got inside, I looked at where I had just spotted the thing, and it was still there. It definitely wasn't human. Me and my sister are thinking it's a skinwalker, but I'm not sure. It's still there, and I don't know what to do. I know this story is kind of shitty, but I just need someone to believe me. This story scares the crap out of me every time I think about it. I was at my grandparents' house one night. My grandmother then came into my room at 3:30 in the morning and told me, "Your grandfather needs your help. Get up." This sort of startled me because she's never done anything like this. I go out to where my grandfather is right outside the door that goes into the garage, and he tells me, "The garage door just went up and down 6 or 7 times, we need to check it out." I obviously said alright, and we went into the garage only to find the pull string that prevents the door from opening, which can only be pulled from the inside. He looks at me and says, "We have to go outside to fix it so no one can get in." We then headed outside, and when we rounded the corner to look at the garage, the motion lights came on, and there seemed to be scratches on the door. He and I fixed the door and went back to bed. About 2 weeks after this, I was staying there again and woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to hear stomping in the kitchen, which is very close to my room. I get up and hear the stomps come closer to my door and stop. I figured that my grandfather was adjusting the thermostat. I opened my door to see what was going on, only to find that everyone in the house was asleep and all the lights were turned off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. A few weeks passed, and I went over there on a weekend because I had nothing better to do. Since it was a weekend, I stayed up rather late and fell asleep watching TV on my bed with my door open. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and for whatever reason, I woke up without any reason. I look around and realize that I have fallen asleep with the TV on. I looked at my door, and at that instance, I saw a man-sized figure step out of my doorway and walk down the hall towards the kitchen. I slammed my door and stayed up all night. By this time, I was pretty convinced I had a demon, ghost, or something in my grandparents' house. I was just relieved that whatever was in their house wasn't following me. Maybe a month after the last incident happened, I was at my dad's house, and I was about to go to sleep. At my dad's, I am on the other side of the house from everyone. It was maybe 10:30 at night, and I was about to go to sleep. I had laid down, turned my TV off, and was drifting to sleep. Then outside of my door, I heard a combination of stomping and a really low sound. This honestly scared the hell out of me. I, in all of my infinite wisdom, decided to see what it was. When I opened my door, I saw the same thing that I saw at my grandparents' house. I teared up from fear, left the light on, and fitfully tried to sleep. It didn't work well. Maybe a month and a half had passed since the last incident. I was at a friend's house, and he and I cleaned out his shed so we could just hang out in there and smoke his hookah. He usually has a lot of people over at his house, but this night it was just him and me. We were smoking hookah and had nearly finished. We were just listening to some music, and I was just sitting there listening to the music when all of a sudden a black flash darted underneath my legs, but I didn't feel anything. I start to look around to see if one of his cats came in with us. As I started to look around, I realized that there was no cat in the shed. I start to become afraid on the inside, but I try to keep myself outwardly calm. I look up at my friend, who has the look of being close to panic, and all he says to me is, "I think something just ran underneath your legs." At this point, I started freaking out because I didn't say anything about it. He told me that he saw it too. We both ran out of the shed and went into his house, where we just watched TV until we calmed down and went to sleep. This was the last time anything like that had happened. This was maybe 3 weeks ago. The house I grew up in was in a neighborhood almost completely surrounded by forest and greenery. While that sounds like it would be tranquil to be around, it was not. Myself and other friends of mine have felt very uneasy walking through those woods even in the daytime, and not just the usual "I feel like someone's following me" feeling you sometimes get in forests or other areas like that. It felt like someone was watching you from the second you stepped into the woods. My house was on a street extremely close to the forest. It was about a 2-minute walk from my house to the main trail. Off the main trail, you were immediately met by thick forest. There were a few small clearings before the huge open field behind the forest itself, so it would take a long time to fight your way through the large forest before getting there. Very few people would make the trek out there, so I could always almost guarantee that every time I went out there I would be able to enjoy nature in serene isolation. In the warmer months of the year, I like to spend my free time walking through the forest, especially in the fall, when the leaves had all turned orange and red just before they would start to fall from the trees. This story takes place on one of those fall days. I had been walking through the forest listening to music with my earbuds in for at least a couple hours. The last time I had run into anyone else was around an hour ago, as per usual for my walks. Even though I knew I was probably very alone apart from various wildlife, I remember still not being able to shake the feeling that someone was very close to me. The sun was also setting, so any sane person would be heading home by now anyway. After walking for a while, I decided to eventually start heading back in the direction of the main trail. By this time, the sun was barely out, and it was getting dark pretty fast. I had almost made it to a pretty nice clearing, but there was no way in hell I was going to go there only to have to walk home in the darkness of the forest for hours, especially since I was already very unsettled. As I turned around to head back towards home, I heard a voice muffled by the music playing in my earbuds come from behind me. I had been in very deep thought for a few minutes, so I was a bit startled, but I assumed I had accidentally spoken out loud to myself. Before I could even take a couple steps further, I heard someone speak again. Fully aware of my surroundings now, I froze dead in my tracks, my heart pounding as I took my right earbud out and sharply turned around to see who was behind me. I was horrified to see a person standing with their back towards me, looking off in the distance. Everything about them looked so familiar, and it took me a couple seconds to come to the horrifying realization that I was staring into the back of myself. I was wearing my dark navy and white plaid jacket, and the black hood of the very hoodie I was wearing was resting on the collar of my jacket. Even my same short, blonde, unkempt hair with its brassy undertones shines in the last bit of light left from the setting sun. And then it spoke again, it's not too far ahead now, in my voice. My exact voice, cadence, tone, everything. It took me a second to snap out of the paralyzing fear I was in and book it home. I didn't try to speak to whatever it was, I just ran as fast as I could to the main trail and out of the forest. As I ran, I could have sworn I had heard someone chasing me the whole way out of the forest, which might have just been a product of being hyper-aware of my surroundings and my state of fear, but I didn't dare look behind me because I was terrified of what I might have seen when I looked behind my shoulder to check. After nearly tripping on fallen branches and stumps a million times, I tore out of the forest and onto the road adjacent to my street. I kept running until I was on the complete opposite side of the road from the edge of the forest. I turned around, and the only thing I saw were the bushes and branches I pushed through on my way out, springing back into their natural places. I stood there staring at the forest for a minute before heading home in fear that whatever that was would pop out, but I saw nothing. I didn't go back into the woods for some time after that, and almost every returning visit I brought a friend with me. My friend told me she also had odd experiences in those woods, as had her sister. They had both seen tall, dark figures standing in the woods when they took walks through the forest together. One of them would see the figure, say nothing about it to the other, and then book it out of the forest together. I'd seen similar figures, but had written it off as me seeing shadows from bigger trees, my mind playing tricks on me, etc. I'd blocked this out of my memory for a long time until my friend brought up her strange experiences in the forest and how she constantly felt uneasy in it. Still to this day, years later, I cannot come up with a rational or scientific explanation for what I saw, and I have had little luck looking online for answers either. It's, by far, the craziest thing I've ever experienced. The house I grew up in was very strange. My friends disliked spending the night there and reported experiencing strange dreams. At night, it often sounded like someone was moving furniture around in the living room. My mom and I would randomly smell cigar smoke. We would catch movement out of the side of our eyes, but nothing was there. Our dogs would suddenly leap up and follow something with their eyes, or would start wagging their tails for no apparent reason. I once had a dream about a man wearing a red plaid shirt with black hair and a mustache leaning on the fence in the backyard. It was so striking that it just stuck with me for about a week before I mentioned it to my mom, and she had experienced a dream about the man in the past. We think that might explain the cigar smell. I was once home by myself and washing dishes when I heard the wood floor creaking behind me like someone was walking on it. I spun around, no one was there. I went back to washing dishes, and there were a few creaks closer. I turned around and asked whatever it was to stop. It did. The most unexplainable thing happened one night when I woke up to a scratching and rustling noise in my room. I thought that someone had broken into the house and was in my room, so I laid still for about 10 minutes as the noise continued. Then music from the music box on my shelf started playing. I flipped over in bed and no one was there, my bedroom door was closed, and my dog was standing on the other side of the room, staring at the bookcase where my music box was. I got out of bed and saw that the drawer had been pulled out, hence the slow scraping noise, and that it had finally been pulled out enough to trigger the music. It was on a flat surface, so it couldn't have slowly slipped, and it was too high for my dog to reach, even if he had the ability to bother it. My mom said that the people my parents bought the house from were a widowed father and a young daughter. His wife had died from cancer in a home hospice in the house. She said that when I was a baby, she would hear me laughing and babbling while I was alone in my crib, and when she would look in the nursery, I would be looking up at something. For some reason, she felt like it was connected to the woman. Marshville, North Carolina, 2008. My then girlfriend lived in a very secluded and rural area, and I lived about 45 minutes away. I drove county roads as much as I could to avoid highways, less traffic lights, stops, etc., and this was a daily drive for almost 2 years. I always took the same road and knew every inch of it by heart. It was mostly a straight stretch of road except for one area where it banked right up a hill, and as soon as it crested, it banked back downhill left. There were very few houses along the way and a fair amount of tree groves, so it was quite dark. Never once had I encountered anything out of the ordinary. There were rarely even other vehicles traveling. The most sign of life I ever saw was an occasional deer in the distance. However, one late summer evening, I was headed home around 2 a.m., cruising around 40 miles per hour down that same road. I got to the hill, made the first bank to the top, and as I turned into a down bank, I saw it. A humanoid shape, cloaked in shadows. No discerning features, and oddly, my headlights barely illuminated it. This thing was just floating there, resembling how ink spreads through water. This was all I could make out before I realized I wouldn't be able to stop in time to avoid it. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, clenched my jaw, and squinted my eyes, as I had no idea what I was about to mow down. At the moment my bumper would have collided with solid matter, the black mass dissipated away. Yet I felt an ice-cold rush through the center of my car. My dash lights failed, but the throttle jerked in a sudden burst of acceleration. I didn't bother even glancing in the rearview mirror. I was frozen in disbelief at what I had encountered. The dash lights flickered back on, and I took the first available turn to the bright lights of the highway. I sped into the gas station parking lot and pulled up under the pump overhang, basking in the warm fluorescent glow and trying to slow my heart rate. I immediately called my girlfriend to tell her what had happened, but I didn't get an answer. I was relieved at first, thinking maybe my imagination had pulled one over on me, and I didn't see anything at all. She saved me from sounding like a raving lunatic to her. So I went into the station to buy some cigarettes, convincing myself that the dark really does play tricks, and wrote off the mishaps with my car as it was what any of it was, and for a long time I told myself it didn't happen. I kept it to myself and made up weird excuses to tell my girlfriend and friends why I wouldn't drive that road anymore after midnight. A few years went by until one night I was drinking with a close friend and decided to spill the whole story. He explained to me that he and his family had lived in the area for years, and while what I experienced was shocking, it didn't surprise him in the least. He told me his parents and grandparents had shared similar stories, and they always just said, "Old Scratch was out tonight." I live in upstate New York, and my family owns around 10 acres of land surrounded by fields and woods. I have always had experiences growing up in this house. Maybe more stories are to come, but anyway. It was late at night, close to 1 to 2 a.m., when this occurred. The window at the end of my bed has AC. It's about 8 feet from my window to the grass below. My cat, Hudson, loves to jump up on open windows and lay across and press against the screen. This night, he had decided to jump up on that open window. I had totally forgotten the screen on my window was out due to the AC. I didn't realize this until I heard Hudson hissing and screeching at something outside the window. I assumed it was some sort of animal, maybe a raccoon, and tried to call him in. Suddenly, he fell out of the window and started screeching. I have never heard him make a sound like this before and jump out of bed to go outside and get him. I went to my little brother's room to have him help me go find my cat. I was really nervous because he's gotten out before and has been missing for days on end, so my fear of the dark was thrown out the window in this moment. I had my flashlight on, sprinted out the door, and went to the side of the house where my window was. I made the turn and shined my flashlight on the area. What I saw was not my cat but a 7-8 foot figure trying to scale the walls of my house and reach into my open window. One of the creature's back legs were pressed against the house while the front legs had a hold of my windsill. The creature noticed my flashlight and looked in my direction. It had deep red eyes that kept me frozen in my spot. The creature stared me straight in the eyes and proceeded to let go of the house and move towards the field on the side. However, it didn't go on all fours. Whatever this thing was, it stood on its back legs and ran quickly into the field. In the darkness, I was able to make out what looked like a set of horns or antlers on this thing's head. Its back legs were at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and it did not look at all like a human. Its posture was slightly hunched over, and its arms swayed to the side of it as it moved. They hung close to the level of what I guess would be its knees. My little brother was in front of the house looking for my cat, so I went to grab him and help me look in the field the creature ran into. At this point, I think my adrenaline was going so fast that I didn't completely process what I had seen. We got close to the field and saw absolutely nothing, no cat or creature. We made our way back to the front to look for my cat. Without saying anything, my brother and I froze. We both looked towards the trees and bushes at the side of the house and saw them rustling. We heard this painfully loud shrieking, and we booked it to the front door. I have no idea if what we heard was that creature or some other animal, but I had an awful gut feeling standing in that driveway. It wasn't safe, and I couldn't have my brother out there. I locked the door quickly and went to the back porch sliding door, where I saw my cat waiting at the door to be let in. He is the type to escape and be out for days with no issue. He's never simply gone to the back door after getting out. He looked scared. The creature was trembling, and his tail was the bushiest I have ever observed. He ran inside and stayed away from the windows and doors for the rest of the night. I only told my boyfriend this story in detail, and even then, it's difficult to describe what I saw, heard, and felt that night. The gut feeling that something was not right and we could be in serious danger was nothing I had felt before until that night. The most memorable part of that experience was the feeling I got when the creature stared into my soul with those ugly, deep red eyes. I have nightmares about this event, and I see its eyes often when I close mine. It took me so long to process and analyze what I had seen, but the closest I can describe this creature and its stature is if you look up Wendigo depictions. I am not completely sure if it was a Wendigo, but I do live fairly close to so-called Wendigo territory in New York. The whole experience freaks me out when I think about it, and I thought I'd finally share it. I used to live in the old town hospital, which had been converted into apartments. Right in the old ER, actually. It was a creepy place to live sometimes, but I never had anything crazy happen. My wife, however, told me a very creepy story. My wife had lived in this apartment for years before I moved in. She had one set of next-door neighbors with whom she was good friends. They had a bizarre experience one night that they related to her the following morning. Neighbor husband commuted a fairly long way for work, so he often arrived home late. He and his wife had also been having some marital difficulties at this point. One evening, as he was arriving home, he happened to look in the bedroom window, which is directly visible when one pulls into the parking lot. To his surprise, he saw an old man standing there, wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown. He parked and dashed inside, asking his wife who was in their bedroom. She said she had no idea what he was talking about. This actually turned into a fight because the husband did not believe in the supernatural, and he thought his wife was somehow hiding a man from him. I should note that there was only one way in or out of the apartment, the front door, so if a man had been inside, his husband would have seen him leave. The husband was also convinced that the man was wearing a hospital gown. Weird story, yeah? It gets weirder. Several years later, a new set of neighbors moved in. My wife found herself chatting with one of the new neighbors in front of their doors. The topic of the apartment building being the old hospital came up, and the neighbor said, "You know, we saw the strangest thing the other night." They were pulling into the parking lot with their U-Haul, and they both glanced up at the bedroom window. As I said, it's plainly visible as one enters the parking lot, pretty much right in front of you for a moment or two. Both the new neighbors were startled to see an old man standing there. An old man was wearing a hospital gown. They entered the apartment and called out, thinking that maybe the maintenance man had stopped by. However, there was no one there, and nobody came out of the front door. My wife was stunned. It was the same lighting. By two different people, years apart. My wife relayed the previous neighbor's sightings, and the new neighbor was shocked too. One person sees something that can be readily explained through rational means. But will another two people, years later, see the same thing? The apartment building has since been sold and renovated. I'd rather not say the name and risk doxing, but I will say that it was located in a town in western Maine. I've had several experiences over the course of the years that could be termed paranormal for lack of a better explanation at this point. However, this location was the source of most of them. 20-some years ago, I was living near the Canadian border alone in a rented log cabin. It used to be part of a fishing resort and had been renovated since it was built in the early part of the century. The cabin was approximately half a mile from the nearest neighbor and 15 miles from the nearest town, so I had gotten used to isolation fairly early on. At the time, I was working PM shifts at a resort 25 miles away and wouldn't typically get home until well after midnight. On this particular night, I had gotten home, put on pajamas, and gone into the kitchen area to wash dishes. I was standing in front of the sink, looking out the window onto the woods, when, directly behind me, just above the height of my head, there was the sound of a man's whistling. Just 2 notes, and then nothing. I positively froze. I looked into the reflection of the window in front of me and saw nothing. Very quietly, I wrapped my hand around a totally inadequate knife that was in the sudsy water and turned around. There was nothing there except for my 2 cats sitting by the wall, looking directly into the air behind me, where the whistling had come from. This kicked off many extremely odd experiences in that cabin that continued until I moved out some 6 months later, but that one was by far the most shocking just because it was completely unexpected. I spent a considerable amount of time alone in isolated locations, but since that evening, I have thought long and deeply about what it means to be a woman alone in the woods from a safety perspective. This one is in Hayward. I was out bow hunting with my dad back in high school, and we decided to walk some old logging roads. He took one, and I took the other, saying we would meet back up in about an hour. Well, as I was walking the road after about 30 minutes, I really was not paying much attention to the road itself. I happened to look forward and see something walking towards me. It had to be about 75 yards in front of me, and it looked to be covered in hair. My first thought was maybe a bear walking on its hind legs for some reason, but as I stopped and looked at it closer, I noticed that the arms and forelegs hung down too far. As in, the palms and paws were below the knees. My next thought was that maybe it was my dad or another hunter, but I couldn't really recognize something that would be a human face. At this point, I quickly notched an arrow, turned around, and walked or jogged in the direction I came from, as by now I was a bit alarmed. I never looked back to see if anyone was following me or not. I made it back to the spot where my dad and I had split and waited for a few minutes. My dad came down his road, and I asked him if he had happened to come across me on his road, and he replied in the negative. I told him about what I had seen, but we never did figure out what it was or who it was. I had an experience last night. My sister and I were out on the back porch with the dogs when our sheep, which we keep in a yard right next to the dogs, started running around like they were being chased. I thought maybe our herding dog, who we keep in the barn about a half-mile down the road, had gotten down here somehow and was bothering them, so I turned on my phone's flashlight. The sheep were huddled in a corner near the dogs at this point, and I didn't see anything. After waiting a few minutes, the dog didn't start chasing them again, so I turned off my flashlight. A bit after I did, they started running again, so I turned my light back on and again saw nothing. They turned it back off, and they ran back to their original corner. This continued for a bit until one time when my light was off and I saw a curly black dog's tail silhouetted against our white truck. Aha! Problem solved. That's exactly what our herding dog's tail looks like, so obviously it's her. At this point, I turned my light back on, I didn't see her, and kept it on. I called her name and she didn't come, which was a bit weird. She's a very obedient dog, even if she does get excited and overheard the sheep. I kept calling her name, and then eventually, the sheep ran from the corner they were in and across the yard again. I hadn't seen the dog scare them, but whatever, they were near the edge of the yard where a relatively small border collie could easily hide in the shadows. The sheep kept running to and from different corners as if being spooked, and I kept just missing the dog getting to where she could scare them in the direction they ran. Actual weird stuff. Then it started getting a little weird. The sheep ran back to the corner near the dog yard, and this time I saw a black llama shape, again partially silhouetted by the car where I thought I saw the dog's tail earlier. We have a black baby llama in that yard, so I thought, oh, she's chasing the sheep. She's always been very friendly with the sheep and calm, unlike our grown llama, who is not in that yard, but maybe she learned from the adult. But then, this is the unexplainable part, the sheep ran from that, again, fully illuminated, corner they were in. I didn't see the llama do anything to scare them. In fact, I can't see her anymore, but okay. But then the sheep ran from their new corner as if the llama chased them from there too, when there is no way she could have gotten to that corner without me seeing her. Llamas are big. At this point, I can clearly hear the llama's hoofbeats and have no idea how I ever thought it was a dog chasing them, but this is hilarious. Our sweet llama is ducking, terrorizing the sheep in the middle of the night, so I pull out my camera and record. I can't see the llama on screen at all, but she's black, so I guess the phone just isn't picking her up even with a flash. The sheep keep running across this same stretch of grassy area, presumably chased by the llama. I can't see her chasing them, which is odd since she's so big, but that side of the yard's darker, so I'm probably just overlooking her. But then, the sheep ran again, this time directly across a completely clear area and into a corner that's just dirt. That's great. Even if it was a ducking squirrel chasing them, I'll be able to see it this time. But then, they run from that corner, and I see absolutely no other animal. Definitely not the llama, not even a raccoon. Nothing could have gotten in that corner to scare them back out without me seeing it. Plus, now that I'm looking around the yard to see what I missed, I see the llamas in the very back. There's a small chute that leads to more of the yard, which the sheep never went into, and I would have seen the llama leave. What the duck? Then, after the sheep have stopped in a new corner, I hear hoofbeats. These hoofbeats are loud. Hella loud. And fast. They sound like horses galloping. At this point, I freak out because there's no way a horse got in there, and I didn't see it. Both of our horses are red, unlike the dog and the llama. So that's it. No way am I doing this. I go inside the house and bring the dogs with me. I don't go back out the rest of the night. I went down to the barn this morning, and the horses and the dog were all in there, no holes in the fences, no way they could have gotten out and back in. Now, these are very calm sheep. We specifically have them down here instead of at the barn because they won't get spooked by the dogs. They're the old sheep. They're not prone to getting spooked or running around for no reason, and in fact, they are quite lazy, again, old. The places they were running from made it clear that whatever was chasing them was in the yard, not outside of it. Sometimes they would run from the center of the yard. The yard they're in is small, the size of a suburban home's backyard. My flashlight illuminated everywhere they ran, except for the very edges, which again weren't the only places they were running from. We have a new strong fence keeping them in that a wild animal couldn't get through unless it was very small, squirrel-sized, maybe raccoon-sized, or literally broke the fence down. It is not broken down, and the animal that I saw or heard at the end was clearly larger than even the sheep. It looked the size of our grown llama, who is not in that yard, and sounded like one of our horses galloping. Anyway. Help? Explainable? Something supernatural? About 8 years ago, I was driving on Highway 29 through a particularly wooded patch around 2 in the morning. Not seeing any lights anywhere, I got out of my car in the middle of the highway to take a piss. While pissing, I was looking around. Pitch black and dead silence. Suddenly, I heard something running fast towards me from the woods. It was making a lot of noise and breaking a lot of branches. I zipped up fast, jumped in the car, and locked the doors. I looked hard in the woods, where the noise came from. I saw weeds move and stop right at the road's edge. Nothing. Then I moved a little more, very slowly. I hit the gas and got the duck moving. I looked in the rear view mirror, and there was clearly a shape in the middle of the road. I thought it might have been a bear, and then it stood up. That's way too tall for a bear. I still couldn't see it, and by that time it was too dark and I was too far away. I don't know what it was, but I do know that being up north at 2 a.m. in the woods, there is a lot your imagination sees. And also a lot of actual, really scary, unexplained shit. I still haven't topped the fear factor of that night. When I was 8 years old, back in the mid-1970s, I was in the Scouts. Me, my sister, and my parents lived in a house in a quite safe suburban neighborhood just south of Stockholm, Sweden. It was only a 20-minute walk from my house to the Scout group's facilities, so I usually walked there or rode my bike. The evening this incident took place, I had walked. An hour and a half later, at 8:30 p.m., I was on my way home. It was mid-October, and it was dark outside at that time of year. I had to pass a large parking lot and a closed gas station, both poorly lit, which I always found eerie. I hurried past it every time until I came to a junction, and this evening was no different. When I crossed the street, I was finally in my own neighborhood, where I knew every tree, bush, stone, nook, and cranny, as kids do. I was walking on the sidewalk along a road leading up to a roundabout. Cars were passing by as usual, even though there wasn't much traffic at that hour. That's when it happened. As I took another normal step forward, it was like the entire world suddenly slowed down and came to a complete stop in just a second. There was a sound that I much later came to associate with the deep subwoofer THX test sound at the cinema before the movie started, if you know what I mean. I experienced tunnel vision, and it was completely silent, no cars, no people, no movement, nothing. The entire situation couldn't have lasted more than 15 or 20 seconds, and then it was over just as suddenly as it had begun. My left foot, which had been frozen in midair for the entire time, hit the ground. It was quite frightening, yet extremely fascinating. First I was just standing there, stunned, and then, very cautiously, I took a step forward, but nothing happened except my sneakers got wet by stepping into a puddle of water. I suddenly realized that the rain was drizzling down and that my clothes and hair were absolutely soaking wet. Only a few seconds before, there had been a clear and calm night sky with visible stars. I did find the entire situation quite bizarre and hurried home. I couldn't wait to tell my parents what had happened. But as soon as I opened the door, I was met with both my parents in a sheer state of panic. They both asked in an angry tone where I had been. I became perplexed and defensive, so I stuttered that I'd been to the Scouts, and then I went straight home. My mother pointed at the clock on the wall and told me to stop lying. The clock said 21:55. More than 1 hour had passed since I left the Scouts. I insisted over and over again that I had walked straight home, and my mother got even more angry. She was, of course, extremely worried, but it came out as anger. But since I knew I hadn't done anything wrong and yet was unjustly accused of lying, I got really angry too. I think that caught my parents completely off guard, because it was not the reaction they had expected at all. That's when my father turned to my mother and said, "I think he's telling the truth." I'll never forget that because I was so relieved. My mom looked completely bewildered but stopped yelling and asked again, "But where have you been?" However, this time she was hugging me harder than she ever had before. When they realized I wasn't hurt or traumatized and behaved just as usual, my father told me he had walked the exact same route I took between the house and the Scout facilities 3 times, repeatedly calling my name, and I simply wasn't there. They had called the parents of all my friends and were in the process of calling the police when I stepped through the door. I simply couldn't believe it. They asked me, more calmly this time, if something had happened along the way, anything at all. I was just about to say that nothing had happened when I remembered the strange incident that I had completely forgotten about due to all the commotion. So I told them exactly what I described here above. They looked at me in mixed disbelief and fascination, but as far as I can remember, they didn't push it any further. The fact is, the whole situation wasn't discussed until years later, when I and my father talked about it again. I again insisted that things happened exactly like I had told him years ago, and he replied that he wanted to believe me, but the story was simply too fantastic to take in, even after all these years had passed. He said, "You were gone, son. As if you had simply vanished from the face of the earth. You were missing for more than an hour. Where did that time go? Where did you go?" Needless to say, I couldn't answer him. Even later, when my father had died, I talked to my mother about it, and to my surprise, she laughed and said she always thought I had been abducted by aliens. As a matter of fact, I'm 55 now, and I still can't make heads or tails of that incident. I never saw any strange lights or disc-shaped objects, but believe me, I really wish I had. That would at least have made some kind of sense. However, I truly haven't a clue what happened in that lost hour. All I know is that it happened exactly the way I told you now. I've told my wife about it, but I never told anyone else. However, I did write the entire thing down the same night it happened, and so did my mom, which I much later discovered. So when I wrote this, I based it on both accounts. So, what do you think? Any thoughts? Location: Northern Highland American Legion State Forest, Vilas County, autumn 2006. I was hiking through the woods, scouting possible deer stand areas, around 2 p.m. on a very overcast and chilly day. I had walked for miles that particular day in hilly terrain, and after finding a few good spots for the upcoming season, I decided to take one of the main fire lanes back another mile or two going north to see what interesting geography I could find. There were apple groves in the area, and I had figured I might stumble upon another grove if I explored a bit further into the thick than my usual route. It was early enough, and there was a medium gray overcast sky with no definition but enough light to see fairly well through the trees without much contrast, making it a good day for scouting, no shadows. I remember the trail ascending towards a large ridge and noticing heavily used game trails crossing the main lane from both directions. I thought, this looks like a good area to possibly find a stand. So, I continued, assessing the brush cover, visibility, etc., slowly meandering up the hill on the trail. As I moved methodically up the trail, I suddenly had a very strange feeling. The sound of the breeze through the tree branches, the bird noises, the red squirrels, and distant sounds suddenly just stopped. It was dead quiet. Not a sound, I mean perfectly silent, like a sensory deprivation chamber level of quiet. At that point, I just froze. Perfectly still. I have good hearing, and I recall thinking immediately that my ears must have been somehow plugged, possibly from elevation, so I snapped my fingers near my ears a couple times and quickly realized that there was nothing wrong with my hearing. Then, I started to get an uncomfortable feeling that quickly overwhelmed me, the feeling of the hair standing up on the back of my neck, and a general disorientation or confusion. Not a dizziness or anything like that, just a sort of creepy stillness, whereas it was as if time itself had just stopped. Once the onset of this confusion became almost overwhelming, I attempted to rotate around and do a 360 to assess whatever the heck was happening. At that point, looking up the hill and the trail in front of me, I saw what I can only describe as the same thing you would see when looking at the paved road ahead on a very, very hot day. It was like a wavering or a heat mirage sort of shimmer that was slowly moving on the trail ahead. After doing another turn around to check behind or around me, I decided to start trying to continue on the trail, carefully and with reservation, of course. As I took the first slow steps forward, my general disoriented confusion immediately gave way to a more foreboding or fight or flight sort of instinctual gut reaction, and again, I just froze. Although I didn't see any deer, birds, or other animals around, I had the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Within a few seconds, I had an almost automatic or uncontrollable urge to try to turn around, go back the way I came, and get the FCK out of there. While taking the first steps, still somewhat disoriented, I heard what can only be described as a very low-frequency electrical humming sound, which was almost more of a vibration, like extremely low bass frequencies, than it was an audible sound, for lack of a better way to explain it. For a few seconds, it seemed as though it took all of my might to make the next few steps back down the trail, but once I had moved about 10 feet from the spot I had been standing in, the low electrical pulsing humming started to fade from my ears, and suddenly I could hear all of the birds, the wind, and the ambient noises of the forest again. The feeling of disorientation also correspondingly subsided, just as quickly as it had come on. I then proceeded to briskly hike the trail back to the highway, get in my vehicle, and, upon starting the car, notice strange radio interference on the WRO radio station that normally came in, and still does to this day, perfectly clear. I was pretty freaked out, and so I decided to just call it a day and go home. It was a day I will never forget. Late that same evening, the other member of my party and I both experienced multiple deer in relatively close proximity to us in the yard just staring at us, not eating, and not moving at all. Just staring right at us for what seemed like minutes, and then had a visit from an unusually large owl, who also stared right at us for some time while loudly hooting in our direction. The next thing I remember is walking back towards the house from approximately a third of a mile down the street and momentarily witnessing ball lightning just above the house as I walked down the long driveway toward the structure. Upon entering the house, I asked fervently right away if everything was okay, due to the lightning I had just seen outside. It was a clear, moonlit night, seriously, and I realized that the other member of my group was standing approximately a foot away from a pine-paneled wall, facing it, standing there in his boxer shorts. Upon asking him about the lightning, which had occurred mere seconds beforehand, he was completely unaware, was confused about what he was doing standing there. The power was on and functioning as normal, and he swears up and down to this day that he had gone to bed that night hours earlier, and has no recollection of how he could have ended up in his shorts staring closely at a blank wall for no reason, nor missed hearing or seeing lightning on the property while apparently doing so. He has no idea how he got there. I did not sleep that night. To this day, at times I wonder what would have happened if I had not been moving very slowly through the woods that day, hoping to see some deer, or if I had ignored my instincts and attempted to continue trudging further up that trail. I have never returned to that specific location in the Northern Highland State Forest. So, last summer, I was spending a couple weeks on my grandpa's childhood farm in North Dakota. It was an insane couple of weeks, but this one night was honestly just creepy. The farm isn't that old. The farmhouse is 65 years old, and my great-uncle's house, which is about 20 yards away from the farmhouse, is about 6 years old. My great-uncle got a manufactured home built for him and his wife, and the farmhouse was renovated to be a summer home for the rest of us. After a long day of fishing and a night of cleaning the fish, my grandpa had me go outside and dump the chum bucket out. Now, western North Dakota has a lot of nocturnal wildlife, including coyotes and these godforsaken creatures called June bugs, but nothing particularly dangerous. I had to walk very far away from the house to a little grove of trees to dump the chum so it wouldn't stink. For some reason, I felt like I was being watched during the whole walk, like something was right there behind me, and I swear I even heard footsteps in the gravel behind me, but when I looked, there was nothing. It was a clear full moon night, and we also have a few bright lights on the buildings, so I could see everything. And the buildings are few and far between, and otherwise it's just empty plains and croplands, so if someone was following me as closely as I thought, I would have seen them, or at the very least, heard them running away each time I looked. But there was nothing, and no one was around. This feeling was new to me. I love stargazing in the country, and I'm also an avid hunter, so wild animals in the night don't scare me. As soon as I had the chum dumped in the woods, I sprinted back to the farmhouse, and everything was fine. The next morning, I brought this up with my great-aunt-in-law. My grand-uncle is a trucker, so she is home alone for most of the week every week, and she has stories. It's been speculated for a long time that there are multiple Indian burial grounds within a mile's radius of the farm. Also, we sometimes find Indian artifacts, such as pottery pieces and arrowheads, in the fields when the tractor tills the land, so we know they were around the farm at some point. Our farm is located in western North Dakota, so there's a lot of native history there. My great aunt told me that one night in particular was more active than the others. Her cat suddenly jumped up from her bed, puffed herself up, and hissed at an empty wall. My aunt didn't know what to think of this. It was just her and her cat, and the cat was hissing at an empty corner. My aunt just wrote it off as her cat being scared of her own shadow or something and walked away. Later that night, my aunt was in bed trying to sleep when she heard voices coming from her fan. Now, this is a common phenomenon, so my aunt just turned her fan off, so there was no white noise to mess with her head. But then she heard heavy footsteps in the kitchen, and she decided to get up and investigate. There was nothing and no one. Not even her cat was in sight, so she just chalked it up to normal house noises and went back to bed. But just as she rolled over and closed her eyes, she said she felt the bed sink down next to her. She rolled over and saw nothing, but she could clearly tell that the bed was sinking down, as if something were sitting there. My aunt was very tired and was actually pretty pissed off at this point. My aunt isn't very easily scared at all, so in her meanest, most commanding voice, she said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, get the hell off my bed, and get the hell out of my house. You are not welcome here." And as soon as she ended this sentence, the bed lifted back into place, and she never dealt with it again. I wish I had half the guts my great aunt has. I had this experience happen to me and a close friend about 3 years ago, and it always stuck out as the one unexplainable event in my life that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I have always felt that this somewhat confirms my belief in paranormal activity. Before I begin with my story, we were on foot. We had decided to go to the woods, and we approached it from the road that divided it down the center. We had headlamps and good gear for going through the woods at night. Our intention was to go in initially, but we were soon halted by a mysterious light. We were stopped before we could even cross over the river on the perimeter of the woods. We stood idly on the outskirts, peering into what looked like a small campfire just across the river on the first trail that diverged from the main road. Roughly 100 feet from where we stood. My friend and I were very wary of going into the woods at night with people we did not know. So we apprehensively waited. We started questioning what we were looking at, not being able to make sense of the light. I assumed it was a campfire, but my friend thought otherwise, and we could not make out what it was whatsoever. I pulled out my phone and began recording and zooming in to try and get a better view of what was going on, but to no avail. It even made less sense on camera. I kept my camera on, however, and continued to record as I and my friend questioned what was going on. We decided to very cautiously proceed over the bridge towards the woods and feel the situation out. After only taking around 3 to 4 steps, the woods suddenly became illuminated, as if we had passed through some sort of invisible barrier that allowed us to not see what was truly in front of us. What we saw was around 10 to 15 massive red orbs. They all appeared to float 15 to 20 feet off the ground and illuminated a massive portion of the woods. The lights were so defined and so bright that I'm sure they would have been seen across the city. This was truly spectacular to see. The area that was illuminated would have been visible from very far away to a lot of people and would surely attract a massive amount of attention. I recorded all of this. Me and my friend at this point had grown overcome with fear and wonder. It truly made no sense. But wonder quickly slipped away and was soon completely overtaken by a sense of pure fear. I felt the deepest curiosity and the most morbid dread. We simultaneously turned on our heels and ran as fast as we could back down the road away from the woods before having even entered. As I looked back, the lights had completely disappeared. We couldn't see them at all when we finally stopped running as well. They were gone. We walked home and talked about what had just happened to us. I called my brother and explained what we had seen as well. We were totally shocked. The experience was the closest to surreal I had ever felt. When we went our separate ways and when I finally got home, I remembered my video. I went to review it, but no lights would appear at all. This only added to the growing mountain of confusion that was piling all around me. I felt completely out of whack and unable to make sense of what had just happened to me. The whole experience didn't even feel real, and it had happened so quickly. I feel like this whole story comes across as convoluted, and that's because it is. It did not really make sense to me whatsoever, and I still struggle to make sense of what I see every time I seriously question it. I went on to Google Maps after and saw where the bulk of the lights originated from. It was one of the massive meadows throughout the woods. I would be willing to screenshot and follow up with an image to make more sense if anybody is interested. I still have the video as well. The video, I should add, has a disembodied voice on it, I believe. But you can't see anything worthwhile at all. I sent the video to some paranormal investigators, and they seemed to think nothing of it. One more thing I will note is that in the movie Fire in the Sky, the scene where the woods are lit up by the UFO looks eerily similar to what I saw. Just on a much larger scale. I used to live in a haunted house, and I have so many stories, but let me tell you about when we tried to get rid of the haunting. My friend and I decided that we needed to smudge the house to try to get some of the bad energy out because so many creepy things were happening. We got some sage, and we got a selenite tower, and we went through the whole house, opening the windows and telling whatever spirits were there to get out. We decided that we would do the entire house and end with one of the upstairs bedrooms that we felt had the most energy. No one was living in this room at the time, which is another story. This was the room that had an opening that went up into the attic and the ceiling of its closet. This opening didn't have a ladder attached to it. You would have to bring a ladder over to it if you wanted to get up into the attic. We opened the window in that room, and we opened the door to the closet. The opening to the attic remained closed. We started smudging the room, and we decided that when done, we would leave the sage on the floor of the closet and the selenite tower on the little shelf in the closet, which was directly below the opening to the attic. Then we shut the door. Over a week later, we decided to check on the room. We went to open the door to the room, and it was locked for some reason. We did not lock the door. So we get the lock open, and then once in the room, we notice the door to the closet is closed. We left the closet door open. Remember, no one was living in this room, so no one had any reason to be there. We try to open the closet door, but for some reason, it's difficult to do so. We're both small girls, so we're both yanking on this handle to this closet, trying to pull it open with all of our might, and finally it swings open. And at the same time, these giant nails come flying out at us. It was like they were wedged in the door to try to get it to stay shut. The opening to the attic was ajar. The selenite tower had fallen over on its side, but it was still on the shelf, right at the edge. The sage had burned down to complete ash. This was strange because, usually, sage has a difficult time staying lit. It was almost out when we set it down in the closet. It was a pretty big stick, too. There was no other way to get into the attic. The windows were 100% locked, the door to the room was unlocked, and the closet door was open. The opening to the attic was 100% closed. I remember exactly how we left everything. I took this as a sign that whatever the energy was in this house, it wasn't planning on leaving. It still gives me the creeps to this day. This was a few years ago. My friend and I were just having a chat. We were walking down an empty road. Both of us, mind you, were really skeptical of the paranormal at that point in time. But that evening, everything changed in a jiffy. So, I'll start with the layout of the place. You'll then understand better. Empty concrete road. To the left of this road are just some bushes and a few trees. A huge, nearly 8-foot wall is on the right. This wall extends the entire length of the road, about 80 to 100 feet. On the other side is a Muslim graveyard, a Hindu cremation ground, and a Christian graveyard. A single plot of land houses all three graveyards. There are a few street lights. It's around 6 in the evening. Now, let's dive into the story. My friend and I arrived here with the intention of simply relaxing and engaging in conversation. We knew perfectly well that the place would either be totally empty or nearly empty. We were right. It was just the two of us. So, we started talking. Nothing is related to the paranormal. We were walking on the pavement. The wall with the burial grounds was on the opposite side. Suddenly, my friend stops walking abruptly. He goes dead silent. Surprised, I ask him what happened. He puts his finger on his lips, asking me to remain silent. He then points towards the wall and almost gasps, "What is that?" I look in the direction he is pointing. And there I see it. There was a shadow, nearly 6 feet tall, on the wall across from us. It looked very obvious. And then, the skepticism inside me takes over. I'm like, "Bro, that is our shadow. Why are you so scared? Children out, man." My friend then proceeds to wave his hand slowly over his head. He looks at me and says, "If it's really our shadow, shouldn't it be moving its hand too? Why isn't it doing that?" I copy my friend. I started waving, too. The shadow simply stands there, imprinted like a ghostly image on the wall. My heart sinks to the ground. That shadow, indeed, belongs to neither of us too. We are the only ones here. Then my jaw falls to the floor. The shadow simply starts walking. With our eyes and mouths agape, we see it move in stunned, terrified silence. Too terrified by what we had just witnessed, we cut short our walk and rushed back home. I grew up in a century-old house. I think it was 105 years old in 1985, so it was very, very old. It was beautiful, but I hated the vibes there. Felt nasty. Unclean. Between the ages of 3 and 8, I would see a fuzzy, misty apparition that would play peekaboo with me in the mornings as I lay in bed. At first, it would be misty and become intermittently more solid, waxing and waning in its visibility like power surges. For a long time, I would stare, especially on weekends when I slept in and had time to ponder, thinking I was half asleep, but I would count, spell words, do my ABC, later recite prime numbers, pinch myself, and move about to make sure I was awake, which I always was. I am pretty straightforward, I always have been. I could not believe my eyes, but then I got used to it, and it would just keep playing peekaboo as I read my books and magazines, went and got some cereal, sometimes took a bath and came back and read, and later, when I got a TV, watched cartoons. It was my morning ghost buddy. I did my thing, and it did its thing. It was a misty shape of a head and shoulder, featureless but semi-solid. I could see through it, but it was also static and would sometimes be more obvious, then fade back to a less solid fog. Also, like moving particles if you stare long enough, like static from a TV but more white. It did not feel scary, just odd. It was almost like I was witnessing something highly unusual, and it was bemusing. It's a phenomenon of sorts. Anyway, the freakiest part is that it was doing the little peek thing at the top corner of a 10-foot door frame. Sometimes a little more than the head and shoulders would move out, and it would be an amorphous blob, but it's like there was a barrier and it could not move far beyond the door frame. I don't even know if it was actually truly conscious enough to be playing with me or if it was sort of stuck there at the frame and doing its thing, but I sort of felt it had some intention, just a feeling I had. Eventually it would stop, or the light got so bright it was not discernible, but I think it stopped about mid-morning. I never saw it at night, dusk, or any time during the day if I took a nap. This was only in the morning hours between dawn and 10 or 11 a.m. Eventually, I just stopped seeing it. It could be that I started closing my bedroom door at night as I got older and wanted privacy. Looking at the history of the house that was built by a distant relative who owned a sawmill and local hotel, he was a bad actor from what I understand. At some point there was a fire shortly after the house was first erected in the 1880s, and the stairwell and upper floor were damaged and reconstructed. It was not a devastating fire that killed anyone, but the stairwell and foyer on the second floor by my bedroom were not the original, but 20 years or so younger. I don't know, maybe he killed somebody there because he was a southern gangster of sorts and was involved in getting rid of some folks, or so it said. Some people did pass away at the house of old age and natural causes, wakes were held there, so maybe a ghost? Appalachia is old, with history predating the settlers, so who knows? So far, there have been no dramatic deaths, and my family is all about knowing the scoop on the family drama. Also, the house eventually burned down due to electrical issues during renovations after we sold it in the 1990s. It also had a majorly creepy vibe in some of the rooms, like a feel of dread and sadness. I had a playroom in the attic, and sometimes I would be playing and feel like I was being watched, and the hair on my arms would actually stand up like fear or static in the air, and my ears would start to ring. I describe it as the air changing. Like when you go to a higher altitude and your ears pop, or when the silence becomes audible, a shift in silence from normal silence to complete and thick silence. It was a total atmospheric shift, or pressure change. I would be so afraid I would almost get a freeze response, but I somehow knew not to react, like I was scared, but to put my things away per usual and calmly leave like normal without freaking out or getting hurried. As I got older, I heard some bad energies feed on fear, so it's interesting that, as a kid, I knew in my gut not to react. Remove yourself, but do not react. I have always had a decent poker face, and maybe that's why. I also don't scare easily, even in situations that would warrant panic. I'll freak out later, but in the meantime, stay cool. Like autopilot or going numb, which is good in times when you need your wits. That's the first time I remember engaging in that mode, about 5 or 6 years old, in my attic playroom. Another story. We lived in a mountainous area in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At the base of the mountain, there was a huge cotton field. It was beautiful, actually. But when I saw it, I would freak the hell out. My mom said it began as a toddler. I would look at the field as we drove by, and I would start hyperventilating, whimpering, and getting tearful. Later, when I got older, around 5, and learned what was up, I would just hide under a blanket until we passed it to manage my exposure. As I got older, I would just look at it and try to figure out what about it vexed me. It was a stunning visage. Beautiful and picturesque. Nothing happened there, like a battle or recent bad history. But my mind saw something my eye could not, and it was freaky, and I hated it. As an adult, I no longer get that feeling at all when I see the field. It was just a peaceful place. People even take pictures in the late summer and fall when the cotton blooms. Also, there's a sunflower field adjacent to it that's glorious. It's a sunny patch in the middle of mountains, a valley with meadows, and coming off the mountain, you get a bird's eye view, and it's like no other. But as a kid, I wanted to walk in a wide circle around it. I mean a wide circle. My best friend, Liz, had always been a skeptic when it came to ghosts, spirits, apparitions, etc. She made fun of me for my obsession with the paranormal. I have never had an experience, but I am close to a handful of people who claim that they have, and I am extremely interested in the topic. She began doubting herself after she experienced something she couldn't explain. I would like to add that Liz has never lied to me, and I could only see pure sincerity and fear in her eyes when she told me her story. There is no doubt in my mind that she had an unexplainable, paranormal experience. She was staying with her then boyfriend in a North Seattle neighborhood for a few weeks, in a house his uncle had owned for some time. Both her boyfriend and his uncle had told her that the basement laundry room was haunted and that occasionally it would feel like someone was following you up the stairs when you were alone. Being a skeptic, she didn't think twice about it and figured they were just paranoid. Both smoked a lot of pot. She did laundry quite a few times and never experienced anything, so she put the warning out of her mind. While his uncle was at work, Liz's boyfriend left the house for 20 or so minutes, went to the store, Liz was going about her day as usual and went downstairs to do laundry. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she felt anxious, as though something wasn't right. The laundry room/basement was set out with the bottom of the stairs being directly in front of the washer and dryer and the rest of the basement leading out to the left. Usually, with the light on, the light being above the washer and dryer, Liz could see the laundry area perfectly and the rest of the room dimly but clearly. However, this time, when she reached that bottom step, the whole left side of the basement was pitch black. She said that her anxiety was causing her to breathe extremely hard, and it heightened to the point that she dropped the laundry basket, turned around, and ran up the stairs. She said the second she turned around, her fear nearly strangled her, and she could sense this heavy, animalistic presence behind her. As she ran up the stairs, she could feel the vibrations in her body of a heavy galloping behind her. She couldn't hear it. I feel like this is important. This was all purely physical sensation within her. She was nearly in tears, telling me about the hair-raising feeling of being chased by something huge and angry until she reached the top of the stairs, in what felt like an eternity but was probably less than 3 seconds. She slammed the door behind her and immediately collapsed onto the ground, sobbing until she got up to call her best friend and tell her about it. Has anything like this ever happened to you guys? I'd love to hear some similar stories. I was somewhere around 7 or 8 when this happened. I can't exactly remember how old I was. I jolted awake in the middle of the night, when the house was almost pitch black. I'm just in bed, sweating, and then I decide to get up because I'm extremely afraid of the dark. I usually sleep before 10 p.m. when the sky would have some shade of blue instead of being completely dark. I walk into the corridor, then into my parents' room, and ask my mom if I can sleep here. I kept saying "Mummy" until she woke up, and then, when she angrily replied, "What?" I asked her again if I could sleep here. She swiftly says, "No, go back to your room," and I hesitantly leave the room back into the corridor. Before I walk to my room, I just stare at the moonlight that lights up part of the wall with shadows of tree branches moving. To add to the horror atmosphere, there was also a bit of thunder outside. After seeing that, for some unexplainable reason, I had a really dreadful feeling about returning to my room, as if some mysterious entity had sneaked into it while I was in my parents' room. Despite the thoughts, I wasn't allowed to sleep there anyway, so I headed back to my room. As I made a turn to face my room on the corridor, I froze. I froze because, from 6 feet in front of me, I was eye to eye with a short, pitch black, Darth Vader-looking thing with dimly lit red eyes. As my instincts tell me something is very wrong, I just quickly run back to my parents' room and sleep on the floor. There was no way I was going back to my room after seeing that. Once I woke up and returned to my room, there was nothing in the doorway. What I had seen last night could have been a hallucination, but that possibility died once I discovered dents on the floor where it had been standing. Only God knows what I saw that night. Sure, if I were a little brave, I could have walked up to the thing and had a closer inspection, but I don't think anyone would move closer to something they've never seen before in the dark. I will never forget this incident in my life. I have lived in a different house since I finished 11th grade. I still can't explain to this day what it was. I'd appreciate anyone theorizing, at least. I always tell the story of how I got into ghost hunting. Years ago, I was dating a girl at the beginning of the ghost hunters craze, about 2005-ish. She got really into it, and I thought it was bonkers dumb, but I loved her, so who cares? She tells me her family owns a large plot of land with a haunted house, and I'd like to record it overnight to see if we pick up anything. The location. Schulenburg, Texas, is located halfway between Houston and San Antonio. The girlfriend's family owned a huge tract of land there, acres upon acres. We arrived that morning to get an early start and explore the land so I could get familiar with it. The entirety of the land was fenced, as rural Texas owners want to do, across the entirety of its boundaries. Entry was far off the main road, down a long stretch of dirt and gravel path through trees and bushes. Once you got through the gate, you emerged at the wood house. The wood house was the newest of the homes built on the property and served as the main house for family and a sometimes guest house. It had a TV but no cable, plus 2 stories. With an open layout and large, welcoming windows, it had all the accoutrements of a modern home, minus the cell phone signal or cable. This would be my home and home base for the next 2 nights. Outside, I was introduced to the golf cart, which was necessary to navigate the huge swaths of land that would otherwise take an hour or more to traverse on foot. After lunch, her mother stayed behind while we loaded up and departed for the brick house. During the years after the Civil War, my girlfriend told me, a local legend was that a bugle player had shot himself through the mouth after coming down with some sort of cancer or tumor. There were records of this, she claimed, although I never saw them. Still, I took it in good faith. The structure itself was half modern, half Civil War. The modern side was wood and electrically powered, but connected to the original Civil War structure. You could tell the difference immediately stepping into the Civil War side. The floor was built of large hewn stone that looked ripped from a rock quarry, and the wooden door was made of ancient wood and felt like it took incredible effort to push open. The Civil War side was essentially one continuous room, with a doorway connecting the living room to the bedroom. The bedroom was like a prison cell. Stepping inside, there was a tiny bed to your left and a dresser to your right. You could turn left and right but not move, you could only lie down on the bed. Visitors who had slept overnight at the house told stories about it, about knocking on the door in the middle of the night and scratching on the floors. The evening. That day, in the late afternoon, I set up on a tripod a mini DV video camera with tapes that needed to be replaced after 4 hours of continuous video. We set it up in the living room facing the bedroom. The camera stared directly out the back window of the bedroom, a small, pathetic thing that provided only a meager view of the outside. A heavy curtain had been set on a recently installed rod to separate the 2 rooms, so I made sure to pull the curtain open. It was heavy, with the thickness of a rug or extremely sturdy blanket, and then I left with my girlfriend and her sister. Before we left, we looked into the camera and made mocking gestures as I proclaimed, "We're the Ghostbusters." An easy joke, a silly one to end a silly project, as we turned the camera on and left for the evening. As we were driving away, I suddenly got an anxious feeling that we hadn't turned the camera on. We quickly zipped back to make sure, made one last silly pose and proclamation of being Ghostbusters, then returned to the wood house before the sun could go down. Daylight was coming to an end. I remember, as we sat around the living room of the wood house, my girlfriend's mother telling us that we had left the light on in the stone house. Of course, we hadn't. We'd never need to turn it on in the first place. It had been daylight hours. But, as we gathered around the window overlooking the land below, I realized that, indeed, the light was on. So we clambered into the golf cart and zipped back to the stone house. Sure enough, the light was on. Strange, I thought, but there had been 3 of us. Any one of us could have turned the light on. But, with it turned off, the house fell into pitch blackness. If you've never left the big city behind or traveled into the country without any nearby towns, there's a deep darkness that settles on the land. It was made worse as we stood in that house, that small, claustrophobic house. For the first time since we arrived, I realized why people might see or hear things while sleeping there. The house was small, like a tomb, and standing in the living room in absolute darkness was terrifying. I quickly ushered everyone out, and we zoomed back to the wooden house. Joy returned as we sat around, telling stories and playing games while we enjoyed dinner. I remembered why I didn't believe in ghosts and enjoyed the rest of the night with people I cared for. The video review. We returned to the house periodically throughout the night to switch out tapes but gave up sometime after 2 in the morning. I didn't really think we would catch anything after all, and the girlfriend was sleepy. We collected the tapes and spent the next day relaxing on the land before returning to my home at the end of the weekend. The evening of our return, the girlfriend opted to make margaritas while I watched the tapes. It was one of those apartments you get in college, small but not too small, with a living room connected directly to the kitchen. She could see me as I sat on the couch and reviewed the tapes. Well, fast forward through the tapes. I knew I wouldn't find anything. I've done a lot of ghost hunting over the years since then, and when you do see stuff or catch things, it's never what people want. It's never the full body of a dead man or some ghastly apparition. And, even on the first day I ever spent reviewing, I didn't catch anything like that either. But I do remember fast forwarding while the tape was still playing, just to get through nothing happening as fast as possible. And I do remember the moment I paused the video, wondering what was going on with the camera. Some of you may have never used a videotape camera before, if you're over a certain age. When you fast forward while it's playing, you see static lines. The image jumps a little. But the image was jumping, not just a little, but a lot. So I paused it and rewound the tape. On video, you could see us all on tape, me shouting about how we're Ghostbusters, and then the sound of the door closing as we left. Then, outside, the sound of our golf cart as it roared to life, and then the fading noise of us leaving. But what I'll never forget is the music. The single, solemn mid-tone started to play. Not quite whistling, not quite a wind instrument. Then the low tone, deeper, and bass-filled. Then there was the high-pitched tone that started to ring out as the camera started to wobble and jump. I didn't know what I was watching. I called for the girlfriend, who put the margarita mix away and came into the room to see why I was sounding scared. I rewound the tape, and we both watched and heard the same music and shaking of the camera. Do you remember me saying that we returned because I thought I had forgotten to turn the camera on? In the far background, I hear the noise of our golf cart returning and, as we pulled up, the sounds and motion of the camera all coming to a stop. I watched as we came back inside, checked the film, did another silly pose, and then roared away again. And, again, a few minutes after you could no longer hear the golf cart? The music, again, started with that low tone and progressed through highs and lows as the camera started to wobble up and down, the screen jumping until the image vanished for a second in a wash of static lines. When the image returned, the music had stopped. We reviewed the photos we took that day. There are strange auras of light around us, but those could be merely light tricks. The music, though, I will never forget. To start, I've always believed there were such things as spirits, the paranormal, etc., in large part due to my family. Most people in my family, especially the parents and grandparents, are religious, so I've always heard about spirits and what comes after life, but the biggest influence would be my father, especially when it comes to the paranormal. He was such a big fan of the show Ghost Hunters that it was pretty normal to find him after work watching the show from his box set along with some other paranormal investigation shows and some stuff like Supernatural, and I would always watch these shows and movies with ghosts, vampires, werewolves, etc., and for so long, it's been one of my biggest interests, even now that I'm almost 27. Ever since I was little, I've always wanted to see and learn more, and I believe I've had a few encounters, most pretty calm besides the initial startle, but one experience that stuck felt so aggressive. My family moved when I was young into a trailer park in Nebraska to be closer to my ailing grandmother when I was, I believe, 8 years old. I finished the school year in a new school, but things weren't so worrying being the new kid starting in the middle of the year since I had met two kids who were so nice and befriended me almost immediately, who coincidentally were my neighbors. One lived next door and the other one rode down from us. The following summer, we'd go outside and play almost every day. Everything felt normal throughout the day, with nothing really eventful happening. We played, we ran around, and eventually everyone got called home. It was nothing but a regular summer day for me. After dinner and some TV, it was starting to get late, so everyone went to bed. I laid down and, for a little while, rolled around and struggled to get comfortable. It just wasn't happening, and I wasn't exhausted anymore from fighting to get comfy, so I checked my alarm clock. I still remember it being a few minutes from 2 a.m., and I started thinking about getting up and playing on my Xbox, thinking it'd burn a little energy and make me tired again. Just before I could sit up, there was a light tap on my wall directly behind my headboard. Just the one singular light tap like someone thumped their finger against the wall. I thought maybe it was Mom, so I didn't budge so I could sneak a game in when she left. Then there was another, until it very quickly turned to sounding like someone tapping all their fingers on my wall directly behind my It's almost like when someone is thinking or annoyed, and they quickly tap their fingers on their desk as an example. I still thought it had to be my mom, somehow she was awake. I was awake, but I definitely felt off. The tapping increased, it went from light taps to a harder, almost aggravated thumping. I was really starting to get scared when there was another thump, but it was to my left side, and I froze solid under the blanket. Opposite the wall to my left was one of those old school big screen TVs with the giant back that everyone hated to move. There was no way someone was tapping or knocking from that side with the TV in the way. Then it started to my right in my brother's room, but I knew it wasn't him because he wasn't home that night. He was at a girlfriend's for the night. Almost in perfect sync, a very angry, Aggressive banging started on the last wall, the one that faced outside, like someone wanting and really trying to beat the wall down, and the rest of the banging started to follow just as aggressively. All four sides sounded like rabid animals were just dying to break down the walls, itching to get to me, and it wouldn't stop. I started to hear this buzzing like noise above me, above the trailer. It reminded me of the noise people make to mimic a cheering crowd, but it was much deeper and scratchier. It just kept getting louder and louder until it was like it was in my head, buzzing and drowning out everything besides the banging and immense fear. It felt like I was surrounded by a trap with something truly awful staring down at me like a predator just beyond my reach, waiting for its opportunity. As suddenly as it started, it just stopped. Everything went dead silent, but I was still frozen and terrified. As soon as it stopped, it felt like I could breathe, and I instantly broke into tears. Thank you so much to everyone who is listening to this. I'm not as much looking for answers as I was to share my experience, but it's something that's definitely interested me since it happened, so I'd love to hear if anyone else has had similar experiences to this. There was a time when I was in the Army where I was required to travel ahead of the company whenever we did training exercises. Our go-to spot was an old World War II Army base. Solid facilities, tons of land, and old buildings to kick around without worries, lots of fun to be had. The thing was, every time I went down there, it was something new, always something freaky happening. One particular night I arrived pretty late and found the entire place was basically shut down with just a skinny security crew barely giving a shit who is there and who isn't, maybe 5 guys to watch the entire place. I go through my process, start my check into the barracks that were assigned to me, and go to get my room ready. I had done this a dozen times at this point, nothing special. Within a few moments of me walking into my room, I heard the barracks door open and close. I didn't think much of it, as security should be checking on me anyway, so I popped out of my room to see who was there. No one. I looked around, saw nothing, and walked outside, pitch black and quiet. I went back inside, locked the barracks door behind me, and locked the door to my room for good measure. I started my preparation for the coming day when I heard footsteps outside my door, heavy steps, instantly shit myself, and hairs standing on end. I mustered what little bit of my manhood was still standing and opened my door to find nothing, nothing except the barracks door wide open. I walked outside expecting to find someone pranking me and saw nothing, nothing except the door for the barracks across from me, wide open. It was my job to secure these barracks, and I had already cleared and locked the others. I radioed security and told them to stop ducking with me because it wasn't funny. I expected laughs, but there were none. There was no punchline, no humorous comments, nothing. I outranked all of them by quite a bit, so if they were ducking with me, that was the time to tell me. Nothing. I definitely didn't sleep so well that night. I have a dozen stories like that. The only other one that really still spooks me to this day was waking up to a pack of coyotes outside my window howling, literally outside my window, scratching on the wall. I still get chills thinking about that one. I spent the majority of 2011 and 2012 living at an old farmhouse in New Hampshire. The house itself was in need of minor repairs, but outside of that, it looked like a typical NH farmhouse. This is a description of the farmhouse from Zillow, listed in the New Hampshire State Register of Historic Places. The Burley homestead has been in continuous family ownership for over 200 years and retains the essential characteristics of the dwelling as it was built around 1760. Portions of the home were remodeled during the early 1800s. Set back nicely on the lot, the side entry porch invites you through the gardens to the door. The center chimney reflects various fireplace openings in most rooms, and there is a huge cooking fireplace with an oven in the country kitchen. The sitting room fireplace is surrounded by early paneling, and the mantelshelf reflects a Federal-style period. The front foyer has wide pine flooring, a huge entry door, a captain's staircase to the second floor, 3 bedrooms, an updated bath, and a back room area with walk-up stairs to the attic. 2 wonderful barns for the hobbyist to enjoy/home business. Many original features. Carriage shed and more. A unique opportunity to own this special home. At first, it was an incredible experience. The 5 of us, 2 sisters, my mother, father, and I, were all ecstatic about the size of this house. We had been living place to place for the majority of my childhood, and the majority of them were small, so to see all the space we had was a dream come true. When you walk inside from the front porch, you're greeted with the kitchen in the far back and this white door next to the sink. The white door led to an extension of the house, this small, carpeted room with the washer and dryer inside. Oddly enough, as I was refreshing my visuals of the house, I noticed Zillow and any other site don't show the inside of this added-on laundry room, or what's behind the house. I always had a weird feeling about that room as soon as I entered it for the first time, so I typically stayed away from it. I lived upstairs, with a window facing the front of the house. About a week into living here, things seemed normal. My sisters and I were attending school, my father was truck driving on the road, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. One day, while I was grabbing something to drink, my mom asked me about this weird rock formation outside the window that's inside the laundry room. I hadn't noticed it at the time, so I walked inside the room and peered out the window. About 10 to 15 feet away was this odd stack of rocks, and it seemed like they were pointing in a specific direction, oddly enough aligned with the window in front of you as soon as you entered the laundry room. I had an erroneous feeling in my gut. At this point, I've seen my fair share of superstition in life and wasn't interested in ruling anything out. I searched around the room for anything else that seemed odd or eerie. The carpet I was standing on wasn't properly stapled to the floor, as if to cover something. Under the carpet is a hardwood floor, with a massive, painted circle that takes up the majority of the laundry room floor. It was a red and blue yin-yang, with several weird constellation-looking symbols inside. Some, later found, turned out to be symbols of planets. All lined up with this stack of rocks in the backyard. I recall there being other rock stacks, but nothing as weird as this. As soon as I saw this symbol, it was as if a coat of negativity enveloped the house. My mom was panicking, my dad wasn't home, and neither were my sisters, just the two of us discovering this was a ritual or praying room inside this house for something. That's something I still know to this day nothing about. Something that could have been here since the 1800s. Over the course of a few months, things started to move around the house and take a turn for the worse. Things would magically disappear. My night terrors came back in full swing. The energy in that place felt evil. I can even recall my mom being possessed. My mother, sister, and I were sitting in the kitchen one early afternoon. My mom had just finished making a sandwich for herself, and we were all having a really pleasant and good conversation. My mom went inside the laundry room to switch the clothes from washer to dryer, but as soon as she opened the door, a dark overcast overcame the sun, and immediately after, I felt this pressure in the room. My mother's smile turned to a frown as she exited the laundry room, and she suddenly became very angry with my sister. She was very angry, she had her hands up, literally instigating me to fight my sister. There was this deep hatred and rage in her eyes, and mind you, my sister isn't a bad person, this was utterly out of the blue. It lasted a few minutes before the overcast cleared up, and my mother stood there in the kitchen, coming to her senses, asking what we were talking about. My sister and I, both appalled at what we just saw, tried explaining it to her. She didn't remember an inch of it. We all had this constant feeling of being watched. My sisters used their TVs to sleep at night, similar to my mother. I just fell asleep in the darkness. However, there was one night that honestly changed me forever. It was a light overcast, about 2 a.m. at night, when I awoke out of my sleep. I sensed something watching me, and I felt this urge to get out of bed, sit next to it, and meditate. I don't meditate often, but I also don't wake out of my sleep in the middle of the night with a sudden urge to meditate, so I obliged. As I was sitting down, eyes closed, meditating towards the window, I felt whatever had been watching me, my family, now in front of me. When I opened my eyes, I saw this weird-looking white masked spirit with empty eyes, about a foot away from my face. It had swirly cheeks, similar to those of Chinese demon masks. The same appearance, just white, and this black void in its eyes. It lasted for half a second. I was speechless. When I went to get back in bed, I heard a noise from outside my window. Gripped on the side is this grayish-brown looking gargoyle with wings and, I believe, black eyes, although our eyes didn't seem to meet, but we never noticed a glow. It just pushed itself off the side of my window and flew into the sky, gone in a flash. I stayed up the majority of that night Googling to see if I could figure out what it was, but my results were inconclusive. The white masked spirit in front of me resembled a Chinese demon mask when you searched for it. I don't recall seeing teeth, the majority of it was peripheral, as I was encompassed and tranced by its hollow eyes. The winged creature honestly resembled a gargoyle. Whatever it was, that house, although spacious, historical, and beautiful, was an absolute nightmare and hellish experience. I was not prepared for what I experienced there. It wasn't until a year or so later that I learned what pagans and Wiccans were, protection spells, all that jazz. With that knowledge, maybe it would have helped? Or make it worse? I appreciate you listening to this story, and I'm looking forward to hearing your own thoughts, questions, and stories. One night, my friends and I stopped at a gas station. I went in to grab something, and the rest of them stayed in the car at a pump. I walk out towards the car, and all of a sudden my 3 other friends start yelling and screaming and losing their SHT in the car. I get in, and all my friends are losing their minds. Dude, did you see that? Holy shit, dude, what is going on? Yes, indeed. What the duck is going on? My one friend calms down and points to an old woman, probably homeless, and says, dude, that old lady just disappeared and reappeared as you were walking out of the gas station. None of us were drunk or high. Apparently the woman was there while I was in the gas station, then disappeared as I walked out of the station, then reappeared out of thin air while I walked towards the car. All my friends swear up and down that they watched her the whole time, and I believe them because I watched them fixate their eyes on something behind me, then proceed to lose their SHT as I was walking towards the car. Then, as I'm sitting in the car, everyone goes silent, and they're shushing each other. The woman was walking towards our car. We all turned pale and pretended not to notice. She walked directly up to our car, then walked right by the driver window and continued to stand behind us for about 10 seconds before walking away. I don't believe in paranormal shit, but that woman was definitely crazy.